let's go ahead and bring him in.
The defense exhibit C, I just offer that as offered. Yeah.
I don't know. I gave it back to you because it had to go to Dr. Grimmett. So upload it. Okay. And then, yeah, since it's offered, just upload it as Exhibit C. What? Yes.
I can't just get it. No, it's okay. I'll figure it out.
Yeah. Actually, maybe we probably ought to do that because otherwise it's going to be in a different format.
Just as long as it doesn't go back to the jury.
Yeah.
No, no, I wasn't planning on sending it back to the jury, but the issue is if in civil cases, we always have both sides upload it, but this is a little bit different. Let me think about that.
Okay. I'll let Jack look.
Okay. All rise for the jury, please. Thank you. You may all be seated. Court will recall 20 CR 1358 People versus Letecia Stauch. Record should reflect the jury has returned to the courtroom. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. When we took our break, we were still in the midst of the prosecution's case in chief. That's where we will resume. Prosecution, call your next witness, please.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. We would call Dr. Loandra Torres.
Raise your right hand, please, ma'am. Do you swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this man will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead and have a seat in the witness stand. Please watch your step as you step into the stand. Mr. Young?
Thanks, Judge. Good afternoon, Doctor. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm good, thank you.
When you get settled, I'll have you introduce yourself to the jury and spell your first and last name, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Loandra Torres. That last name is spelled Torres.
Is your first name Loandra?
That is correct.
Good. One of the few names I was able to get right, perhaps. So what do you do for a living, Doctor?
Currently, I'm employed with the Office of Civil and Forensic Mental Health. I am the clinical director of the Court Services Department.
What does that mean?
Well, it essentially means I'm involved in a number of different duties. The Court Services Department here in the state of Colorado is responsible for a number of the court-ordered evaluations as it pertains to competency to proceed, as well as the mental state at the time of the crime evaluations. So in my role, I'm responsible for supervising the supervisors who supervise all of the state evaluators who do those types of evaluations. Another one of my primary roles is to advise administration as it pertains to clinical issues associated with policy and legislation. And my tertiary role is that I am the associate director of our formal forensic psychology fellowship with the department.
Are you a psychologist?
I am a psychologist.
How long have you been a psychologist?
I have been licensed since 2012.
And have you been doing that same role, or at least in that at some point with that agency throughout your whole career?
Not throughout my whole career.
What did you start out being when you became a psychologist?
I was initially licensed in Texas, and I worked in Texas for a couple of years conducting competency to proceed evaluations at a private hospital. Then I came to Colorado, was licensed here, I worked for a couple of years at the state hospital down in Pueblo, primarily doing violence risk assessments with individuals who had been adjudicated not guilty by reason of insanity. Following those 2 years, I transitioned to the Court Services Department, worked as a state evaluator, doing competency to proceed evaluations, as well as mental state at the time of the crime evaluations. I did that for a couple of years, promoted to a supervisor level, so started supervising individuals as well as conducting these evaluations, eventually promoted to the clinical director level, where I started transitioning to doing the things that I already outlined, in addition to continuing to do some evaluations.
Do you assign evaluations to particular psychologists and psychiatrists within that agency?
No, I'm not involved in assignment.
Are you a board certified in the field of forensic psychology?
I am.
And what does that mean to be board certified?
Being board certified essentially means that you have gone through a rigorous examination that includes a written examination and an oral defense of your work in front of a panel of experts. So your competence in the field is acknowledged to be at a high level enough to become board certified.
And is that rare for a psychologist licensed in Colorado to be board certified?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's difficult and it takes many years. I think the whole process for me at least took approximately 2 years and a lot of studying to accomplish.
Could you tell the jury a little bit about your educational background?
Yes, I have my bachelor's in psychology from Johns Hopkins University. I then went on to obtain a master's and a doctorate in forensic psychology from Alliant International University in Los Angeles. Following the completion of my doctorate, I did a 1-year formal postdoctoral fellowship, which helped me specialize in the area of forensic psychology and conducting competency and mental state evaluations.
And have you taught and gave presentations in the field of forensic psychology?
I have.
Tell the jury about that.
My teaching has been, well, formal teaching, I'd say, has been pretty limited. I did conduct a course out of Texas Tech University during my fellowship year, but I've been involved in training for quite some time. As I noted, I'm the associate director of our formal forensic psychology fellowship. So that means that I assist with the training of individuals who have received their doctorates and are specializing in these types of evaluations. So there's a lot of training and education that goes into that. In addition, being the clinical director for the Court Services Department, I am involved specifically in the training of competency to proceed evaluations, along with one of my colleagues.
How many competency evaluations have you conducted in your career?
Competency? I think it's fair to say that I've probably conducted somewhere between 700 to 800 competency evaluations.
And how many legal insanity evaluations have you conducted in your career?
Sanity, I've done close to 35.
And have those 35 been here in Colorado?
All but one.
Assuming that one was in Texas?
Yes.
See how I put that together so quickly?
Very good of you.
Have you testified as an expert in the field of forensic psychology in the past?
I have.
Approximately how many times?
31.
And out of those 31 times, did those include both competency hearings and perhaps jury trials involving the issue of insanity?
Yes.
At this time, we would ask that the court qualify Dr. Torres as an expert in the field of forensic psychology and allow her to render opinions in that field.
No objection.
The witness will be so qualified. Go ahead.
So Dr. Torres, could you let the jury know how you became involved in this particular case, the people of the state of Colorado versus Letecia Stauch?
Yes. I became involved in this case in 2020. I was one of the evaluators who conducted her initial competency evaluation.
And how did that competency evaluation come to you?
I can't say I remember the specifics, but we do have a process for assigning evaluations. And given the high profile nature of this case, They asked myself and Dr. Gray to conduct it since both of us are board certified in forensic psychology.
We're going to talk about Dr. Gray in a second, but why two psychologists involved in this case versus just one?
Usually with such high profile cases such as this one, we like to involve two individuals because it's two sets of eyes. Two individuals who can draw an opinion from what we see, what we are reading, and that's the primary reason.
And who is Dr. Gray?
Dr. Gray is currently employed as the the director of training at the Court Services Department.
And does he have an office down at what used to be called the State Hospital, Colorado what is it called? Colorado Institute of
The Colorado, it's not the Colorado Mental Health Hospital in Pueblo.
Okay. Is that where does he still have an office down there?
He does.
And what does he do there at the state hospital?
His primary duties are ones of training, so he is our primary training director. When I noted that I do training for competency evaluation, he is the other colleague I referenced. He is also the primary director of our postdoctoral fellowship, overseeing the training of our postdoctoral fellows. He is also involved in organizing the yearly or bi-yearly trainings that we have as a department, which revolve around a number of different topics, those associated with competency, those associated with clinical diagnosis, etc.
And did this case come to you and Dr. Gray for evaluation based on a defense counsel raising competency in this case on June 5th of 2020?
Yes.
And could you, the jury's heard a little bit about a competency evaluation, but could you let the jury know what you did upon receiving an order from the court to do that competency evaluation?
Sure. We have a pretty standard process that we follow. The first thing that we do whenever we receive an order for competency is that we contact both sets of attorneys, the defense attorney and the prosecuting attorneys, to ask any questions about why the issue of competency was raised, what concerns there might be, if there are any concerns at all. Following that consultation, we then review all of the information that we have available to us. In this case, there was a good amount of discovery that we had to review in preparing for the actual interview. Once that is completed, we conduct an interview for competency to proceed. In this case specifically, it occurred over the course of 2 days, meaning that there were two separate meetings, and we conducted some psychological testing as part of our evaluation.
And I'm going to talk about that competency evaluation here in a little bit, but did you also conduct an insanity evaluation based on the defendant's not guilty by reason of insanity plea that took place in February of 2022?
Yes.
And so I may be jumping back and forth as we talk about those, but did Dr. Gray assist you in that evaluation as well?
Yes, both of us worked on the sanity evaluation as well.
And did you use information that you gained or you looked at in the competency evaluation from June of 2020 for the evaluation you did on insanity from February of 2022?
We did incorporate, we did consider our competency evaluation. The discovery was pretty much the same for both cases. And for our sanity evaluation, we had access to a number of other documents like medical records, health records, employment records.
And did you receive additional discovery based on the time frame between the competency evaluation and the insanity evaluation?
We did.
And I think you already answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Why were you and Dr. Gray chosen to do the insanity evaluation on this particular case?
We were chosen to do the sanity evaluation for similar reasons, in that both of us are board certified and it is a high profile case. But in addition to that, we had already reviewed the discovery from the competency evaluation, which makes it a little bit easier. It facilitates the evaluation moving forward. It means another evaluator doesn't have to review all of that information. A tertiary reason would be because we had already seen her at one point in time, which could be helpful in terms of coming to conceptualization for the issue of sanity.
Did the prosecution or defense counsel have any say on you and Dr. Gray doing the evaluation in either the competency or the insanity evaluation?
No.
Was that simply a court order? It went to the state hospital. There's a process where people are assigned to do the evaluation and then it's done.
Yes.
Okay. However, you did indicate that you contacted both parties initially to see what concerns there may be or what issues there might be for you to look for. Is that what you testified to?
Yes, we did that for the competency evaluation as well as for the sanity evaluation.
And as you do these evaluations for court order, is there any incentive to go one way or the other in your conclusions?
No, we're paid the same regardless.
I hope you understand why I'm asking that. I'm not trying to offend you or anything, but do you just look at the discovery, the police reports, everything involved, go through the same process where you may interview the defendant and then look at collateral information based on that interview and then make a decision?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to go through that process, and I'd like to start with the competency evaluation first, okay?
Okay.
What did you review prior to your competency evaluation with Ms. Stauch? Was it back in June when you saw her, or was it closer to August?
We saw her, it was closer to August.
Okay, I can take a look at your report. Did you actually see her on August 4th of 2020?
Yes.
Okay. Prior to your interview with her on August 4th of 2020, was she at state hospital facility for some time period?
She was there, I want to say, approximately 2 weeks before we saw her.
And is that a benefit to your evaluation or is it a detriment to your evaluation?
It's a benefit.
Why is it a benefit?
It's a benefit because it allows some observation of her behaviors for, one could say, a 24-hour period of time that we can then incorporate into our understanding of what is going on with her.
And so while she's down in Pueblo, right? Is that where this was conducted?
Yes.
Are you reviewing discovery and looking at collateral information prior to doing the forensic interview with her?
Yes.
Is there a reason why you don't do the forensic interview first and then look at it later?
We review the information that we have available to us. A lot of it is primarily the discovery so that we have an understanding of what's going on in her case, as well as the potential evidence against her so that we can better evaluate her own understanding of her case and the evidence against her.
And could you describe for the jury the state hospital, where she was staying, and the setting of the state hospital, I guess is the best way to describe where she was living for that 2-week period?
Sure. She was in our high security forensic building. There is a unit there specifically for female defendants. So she was on that unit. It's a locked unit, but individuals on that unit are otherwise free to roam around the unit. They usually have their own room. I'm pretty sure they do not share rooms, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Usually there are treatment groups that are happening on the unit. I imagine that she might have attended some of those, but I don't recall exactly if she did or not.
Are there people watching her? Are there nurses there that you could go ask questions about what her demeanor was like, how she's interacting with other people, that kind of thing?
Yes, there's nursing staff on those units 24/7.
And did you do that in this particular case? You and Dr. Gray, did you consult with the nurses within that unit to see how she was acting while she stayed at the state hospital?
We reviewed the documentation that they had for Ms. Stauch. I don't remember that we specifically spoke to nursing staff regarding how she had been doing on the unit.
And what documentation did you review? Just kind of summarize that for the jury.
Any of the mental health notes and records that are kept. So those would include interactions that she had with nursing staff. Those are kept on a daily basis. As I noted, when groups are run, there's usually documentation that goes along with that as well, but I don't remember incorporating that into our report, so I don't actually think that we saw anything associated with individual or group treatment.
Jump forward to 2022 when she went down for the insanity evaluation. Was she a resident at the state hospital for that evaluation?
She was not.
Did she just come down for the time period that you and Dr. Gray spent with her during that evaluation?
Yes.
The documentation that you talk about, do the nurses, are they trained as to why they're documenting their observations of particular people in that ward?
Yes, they are. Most of them have been there at least for some time, so they have an understanding of documenting behaviors that they are seeing. I think I would also add that we did read the notes by the unit psychiatrist who initially evaluated her whenever she arrived at the hospital, which is a typical thing that they do.
Do you remember that psychiatrist's name?
His last name is Hoffman.
And what did Dr. Hoffman have to say with regards to Ms. Stauch as she was entering the facility and during this 2-week time period?
From my recollection, he noted that she reported past depression, past anxiety, issues with panic attacks, excuse me. She also reported or endorsed symptoms that might be consistent with mania in a bipolar disorder. So ultimately, he noted that she could have some post-traumatic stress disorder, that she could have bipolar disorder, but he noted specifically that there needed to be more information to really figure out if that was the diagnostic picture, given that a lot of it was based on her self-report.
And is that information that you and Dr. Gray used at least during the competency portion of this evaluation?
Yes.
For instance, was bipolar disorder a diagnosis that you were looking at as you were conducting this evaluation?
It was one of them.
And we're going to get to those in a little bit about the diagnosis. Why are you looking at diagnosis during a competency?
We consider a diagnosis because for competency, the legal definition is a mental or developmental disability, which essentially means if there is a mental illness that is impacting her, say, functional competency related abilities, which means whether she understands factual information pertaining to how court works, or whether she has a rational understanding of her case and can think through possible defenses in a rational manner.
And did you find that she could in this evaluation? Did you find her competent to proceed in the court proceedings?
Yes, ultimately we found her competent to proceed.
Now, again, the jury knows this, but I want to ask you, are you the first one doing a competency evaluation in this particular case?
Yes.
Are you familiar with Dr. Grimmett, who did a second competency evaluation?
Yes, I am.
You probably saw her out in the hallway earlier.
I did.
Okay. That's why I say the jury already knows about these things. So what I would like to do is talk about your forensic interview with the defendant, Ms. Stauch, on this June competency evaluation.
Okay.
So you meet with her in August of 2020, is that correct?
Yes.
What did she have to tell you about her personal background? Do you recall?
I mean, she said a number of things. In terms of her personal background, she told us how she was born in North Carolina. She described a somewhat disruptive childhood, just as it pertains to some emotional, physical, sexual abuse at the hands of a stepfather. This individual, the stepfather, probably came into her life when she was about 4 years old, but she noted that the sexual abuse maybe started happening late in childhood or early adolescence, maybe between the ages of 9 and 12. She noted that she witnessed domestic abuse. I'm actually not 100% sure if she told us that during the competency evaluation or during the sanity evaluation.
And if I could interrupt you just there, in your report, if you have that in front of you, it helps you refresh.
And anytime the doctor needs to look at either report, I don't have a problem with just looking at it to do the whole report.
There's a lot of information in this case.
There is,
And
yes.
so if you need your report, we can take a look at it. But I do want to address what you talked about, the sexual assault when she was younger by a stepfather. Do you remember that aspect of it?
Yes.
And I'll just refer you to page 2 of 10 of your report. Do you recall her saying that she was approximately 12 years old when that happened?
That is what she told us during the competency evaluation.
Did she tell you something different in the insanity portion of the evaluation?
During the insanity evaluation, she said it started around age 9.
And that's almost what? Almost 2 years later, a year and a half to 2
Oh,
years
the sanity evaluation was close to 2 years later.
Did she talk to you about her educational background during the competency portion of your evaluation?
Yes.
What did she say about her educational background?
She noted that she completed a bachelor's degree, a master's in education at Capella University, and a doctorate of education at Liberty University.
Did she tell you whether or not she was involved in sports and potentially received a scholarship for in sports?
Yeah, she did say that.
What did she say about that? Do you recall?
She said that she received a scholarship to a Division I school for softball specifically. Oh, sorry, an athletic scholarship.
Did she talk to you about her employment history?
Yes.
What did she say about her employment history?
In terms of her employment history, she noted that she had primarily worked in teaching, that she had a credential in special education specifically, that she worked for a period of time in South Carolina prior to coming to Colorado. Here in Colorado, she worked for a time period at Whitefield School District, and that her longest period of employment was approximately 6 years when she was in South Carolina.
During the competency portion of her evaluation, did she ever indicate that she lived in Florida at any given time and worked in Florida?
I don't think she mentioned that during the competency evaluation.
Did you also ask her questions about any potential prior mental health issues with Ms. Stauch during the competency evaluation?
We did.
And what did she say as to regards as she had ever been in any inpatient treatment for mental health issues?
During the competency evaluation, she said she had never been psychiatrically hospitalized.
And was that consistent? Well, let me ask you this first. Did you review the jail notes in this case with regards to Ms. Stauch
Yes.
when she was initially brought into the jail on March 5th of 2020?
Yes.
Was that consistent with the jail notes that you saw based on Ms. Stauch's prior inpatient or lack of inpatient treatment?
I'm pretty sure that it was consistent.
Okay. Do you want to look at the notes or?
I don't think we reported in our report specifically whether the jail had noted previous hospitalizations or not.
Okay. Let me just ask you this. Was it, let's see, March and June of 2022 is when you're doing the insanity evaluation. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
Had that changed in March of 2022 with regards to her history of inpatient treatment?
Yes, in March of 2022, she did tell us that she had a history of psychiatric hospitalization, specifically in Canada.
And were you able to ever corroborate whether or not she was ever an inpatient, well, in inpatient treatment in Canada?
We weren't.
Look,
We wanted to. She was not able to tell us what city it occurred in or the name of the actual facility. So when you don't have that information, it's hard to figure out where you need to request information from.
and I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, but during the insanity evaluation, did you discuss the inpatient treatment program that she was alleging that took place in Canada?
During the sanity evaluation, she did not speak very much about it. If I'm remembering, she said that she could not remember it herself.
We're going to play a portion of video testimony, and we'll talk about that then.
Okay.
So let me go back to what we were talking about here. Were you familiar with Dr. Grimmett's report that happened after your competency evaluation, but before the insanity evaluation? If that makes
Yes.
sense? Are you also familiar that she told Dr. Grimmett about this Canada inpatient treatment?
Yes.
Now, was there some consistency with the amount of time that she spent in each version that she was telling different doctors?
I'm gonna take a look at my sanity report.
Okay.
In my sanity report, I noted that she had made statements to Dr. Grimmett about being hospitalized in Canada, said it occurred in 2018 to treat a psychosis and lasted only 2 days.
And do you recall what she's telling you all during her insanity evaluation?
Outside of the specifics I noted in my report that she gave some vague information, but that she didn't recall the name or location of the facility itself.
We'll cover it when we play the video later.
Okay.
Okay. Back to the competency evaluation interview. I'll turn your attention to page 4 of 10 of your report, the middle paragraph there of the competency evaluation. Do you have a paragraph there listing things that nursing and the psychiatrist that you alluded to earlier talked about how she was doing on the ward during the competency portion of this?
Yes.
And what was going on based on your note there in your report?
In my report, I note that when she arrived at CMHIP, when they do an admission evaluation, she told mental health staff that she had heard voices in the past related to an ex-husband of hers, but she said that she wasn't currently experiencing hallucinations. She talked about her past trauma. She said that she had nightmares and that she had visual flashbacks. She reported being anxious, having panic attacks several days of the week. She said that in the past she had had symptoms consistent with a manic episode, specifically talking so fast that she did not make sense, rambling about things in a manner that didn't make sense, that she had experienced high energy, brief amounts of sleep, and impulsive and erratic behavior.
Was there other notes saying that at the same time she was calm and communicative and, I don't know, I keep using the word normal, but act normal under that setting?
Yeah, it said that generally speaking, she tended to present as calm and cooperative, pleasant. No apparent symptoms of acute mental illness were notable from mental health staff or even the psychiatrist.
In the last paragraph on that page 4 of 10 of your report, you have a note there inquiring things that she might have asked staff about, how she should act and that kind of thing. Do you see that in the report?
Yes.
What was that all about, and what did that mean in the course of your evaluation?
In the mental health notes from the state hospital, it noted that she specifically asked staff whether they could tell when a patient was faking instability or mental illness. You don't see that very often in the records. You do see it on occasion. For me, it was interesting to incorporate into this report simply because it opens up a hypothesis as to whether she herself might want to be exaggerating or feigning symptoms of mental illness.
And is that something that you consider going into the forensic interview when you're conducting the interview for the competency portion of this evaluation?
Whether or not somebody is exaggerating or feigning symptoms of their mental illness is something that we always consider when it comes to these types of evaluations.
And why is that?
Because in this context, there is a potential secondary gain in terms of potentially exaggerating or feigning symptoms of mental illness. Although I'd say it's not as common as one might think it would be. There are always individuals who might want to fake mental illness to either be found incompetent, delay the proceedings in their case, or in the sense of a sanity evaluation, it would be to be found insane and potentially avoid a prison sentence.
But at least at this point in time, in August of 2020, you're only evaluating her to see what her mental state is on that day. Is that right?
Yeah, for competency, you're looking at their current mental state to see whether a mental illness is impacting their current functioning.
And so, this is a proper question or not, but I'm going to ask it. In an insanity evaluation, would you want to dig deeper to get more collateral information because the stakes may be higher than they are in a competency evaluation?
Well, I don't know if I would so much agree with the second part, the stakes part, but for a sanity evaluation, it often does involve a more thorough deep dive into past mental health treatment, past hospitalizations. I would say getting that history for a competency evaluation can be equally as important. You're just looking at the information that you get through a different lens depending upon what evaluation you're doing.
Did you conduct, or did you have the results of any psychological testing with regards to the competency evaluation that you conducted back in August of 2020?
Yes. For the competency evaluation, we had one of our colleagues, Dr. Hashimoto, do some psychological testing, and specifically, she gave the Personality Assessment Inventory, or PAI for short. And then we also did the MMPI-2, so the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory, second edition.
And why are those tests and results relevant in your evaluation?
Both of those tests, they're similar and different, but both of them are used to help with issues of diagnosis. It has a variety of scales that look at different types of diagnostic symptoms. So for example, anxiety, depression, past trauma, schizophrenia. Both of those tests also have validity measures on them. Both of them can give information as to whether someone might be exaggerating symptoms of mental illness, or conversely, they're defensive about symptoms of mental illness. So we give these evaluations to help our diagnostic understanding of what someone might be experiencing or going through. It's just another data point. We give them when the diagnosis is a bit unclear. We also give them to see if there's any concern about further exaggeration or feigning.
So what were the results with regards to Ms. Stauch and the psychological testing that you've been talking about?
Both of those measures were invalidated. The first one that we gave was the personality assessment inventory. That one was invalidated due to, I'd say, potentially careless responding, or potentially having, we call it an idiosyncratic read of the items on that test. But what that means is they read the item and it's not exactly answered in the way that the item was written, or it's not pulling for the right information. So as a result of that, the entire profile was not interpretable. In response, Dr. Gray and I, during our interview, because we saw her 2 days in a row, we asked her about some of her responses to some of those specific test items. And then given that that was invalidated, we gave a second measure. That's when we gave the MMPI-2 to see if we could get some information from that. Unfortunately, those results were invalidated due to exaggeration.
When you say invalidated, are they invalidated based on Ms. Stauch's answers to the questions?
Yes.
In 302 questions, does that sound about right? Or is it close?
There might be a little bit more, but that's about right.
A lot of questions.
Yes.
Multiple choice?
True, false.
True, false.
Yes. The PAI is on a Likert scale. I don't know if that matters, but.
I don't even know what that means.
Oh.
What does that mean? I'll tell you what matters.
No problem. A Likert scale is, to put it simply, do you ever experience this? Give a response 1 through 4. So the way it's worded specifically is, you don't ever experience this particular symptom, or you sometimes experience it, or you frequently experience it, or you often or always experience it.
So scale 1 to 10 type thing?
Yeah, except it's 1 through 4. It's only 4 choices.
Okay. Going back to the forensic interview with regards to the competency evaluation, did Ms. Stauch ever give you any self-diagnosis of potential mental illnesses that she felt she had?
During the competency evaluation?
Yes.
During the competency evaluation, I don't recall specifically, but I do know that she talked a lot about being manic. She talked about slipping in and out of reality.
Is that consistent with bipolar disorder being manic?
Mania is a component of bipolar disorder. And just because somebody says that they're manic doesn't necessarily mean that they are or have been or have bipolar disorder.
Did she ever bring up anything about having another personality or multiple personalities during your competency interview with her?
She did not.
Did you ask anything about that?
During the competency evaluation, we weren't specifically looking for a dissociative identity disorder. But interestingly enough, when we were reviewing her responses on the PAI, the first test that we gave that had been invalid, one of the questions we asked her specifically about talked about having 3 or 4 personalities, and she had responded true to that item. So we asked her about that, and she essentially told us that sometimes she experiences different aspects of herself. So for example, Sometimes she feels more compassionate, or sometimes she feels more competitive when she's playing sports, or sometimes she lacks empathy when she's around her family. But she did not talk about or specifically delineate having different personalities in the way that she did during our sanity evaluation.
And was that of note to you? Because I know the big picture is coming on the insanity evaluation, but the first contact with her, you asked her directly about dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities, and she denied that at that point?
Yeah, she definitely didn't endorse it in terms of the criteria for dissociative identity disorder and how they're written. So her response to us was pretty benign. We didn't think very much of it.
I imagine it became, what's the opposite of benign?
Important.
It became important when she did disclose that she had dissociative identity disorder during the insanity portion.
Yes.
Okay. And we'll talk about that when we get there as well, a little bit more, okay? Needless to say, did you make some diagnosis of Ms. Stauch based on what you knew during the competency evaluation?
Yes.
And what diagnosis did you reach for Ms. Stauch?
We ultimately diagnosed her with a personality disorder, specifically a specified personality disorder, noting borderline and narcissistic features.
Tell the jury about that. What does that mean?
Sure. A personality disorder is essentially maladaptive personality characteristics that are evident throughout the lifespan. We noted borderline and narcissistic features given her history of instability of relationships, her history of mood swings that were, I want to say, best delineated by her public defender at that time. When we consulted with the public defender, she was the one who described an intense reactivity of emotion to different things, that just somebody who goes from 0 to 100 very quickly. We also noted her own self-report of impulsivity. Those were the primary features of a borderline personality that we noted with her. In terms of narcissistic features, she really touted her intelligence and her abilities. And when she spoke to us about her treatment in the jail, her expectations as it pertained to how she would not proceed with her defense, but how attorneys should treat her, there was some notable entitlement in that that gave us a hint that there might be some narcissistic features in there as well.
And the jury's heard about rule out, but did you have any rule out diagnosis with Ms. Stauch?
We did.
Can you just explain again what that means and whether or not that was relevant into your determination that she was competent to proceed?
Rule out diagnoses are essentially provided when you feel like you don't have enough information to say, yes, she meets these criteria for a particular diagnosis. We did a rule out for bipolar disorder as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. And we noted that this was a rule out because a lot of it was based primarily on her self-report. We didn't have much in terms of collateral information from past treatment records to substantiate the things that she was telling us. But given that her self-report was consistent with what one might see, we wanted to at least acknowledge that this could be there. We're just not 100% sure that it is.
Did you eventually, I think you already alluded to this, did you eventually rule out bipolar disorder during the insanity evaluation?
We did.
What about post-traumatic stress disorder? Were you able to rule that out at any time?
Not completely.
And we'll talk about that again when we get to the insanity evaluation portion. I just want to go back a second to the psychological testing that was conducted in relation to the competency evaluation. On page 7 of 10 of your report, you indicate that results of psychological testing showed that she was significantly over-reporting symptoms of serious mental illness, responding to items in ways atypical even of genuine psychiatric impatience.
Yes.
This raises questions about the veracity of her self-report.
Yes.
What does that mean? And what are you basing that on?
So, as I noted, these psychological tests that we gave, they had these validity measures. She invalidated the PAI. I already spoke to the reasons why. When it came to the MMPI, that one has even more validity scales on it, has more than just one that looks at issues of exaggeration, has 3. One of them is just generally, are you exaggerating symptoms of mental illness? And that one was very elevated. There is a third one on there that looks specifically, are you endorsing symptoms that even the very ill, psychiatrically hospitalized patients don't tend to endorse? And she endorsed a number of those to the point where that was elevated as well. So we give these tests, it's indicating to us there might be some feigning and exaggeration. We keep that in mind when considering the things that she is telling us.
And I'm going to jump all over the place, so I apologize, but did she also take the MMPI-2 during the insanity portion of her evaluation?
Yes, we gave it again.
Were the results consistent with what you just talked about from the competency evaluation time she took the test?
Yes, the second time we gave the MMPI-2, it was again invalidated due to exaggeration, and both of those scales that I've referenced were elevated.
And did she take it again with a Dr. Leach? And did you review the results from Dr. Leach, who's a psychologist, with regards to the MMPI-2?
Yes, she was given this test a third time. To my recollection, those results were not invalidated. But I don't remember specifically anything else about that testing. I'd have to go back and look through the notes.
Do you have your notes there on that? If you're not, I can approach with.
I have the summary that we wrote. All that we wrote about that third one is that she was getting close to those cutoff points for potential over-reporting symptoms of serious mental illness.
Would that be consistent with the prior 2 MMPI-2 tests that she taken both during your competency and insanity evaluation?
Consistent in that there was exaggerating of symptoms, inconsistent in that both of our tests were invalidated because of that.
Okay. And what does that tell you in the big picture with regards to her self-reporting, especially when she starts talking about dissociative identity disorder?
Unfortunately, I'd say that the indications of exaggeration or feigning undermines her own self-report.
In your report on the competency evaluation, in several sections, you allude to psychosis as to whether or not Ms. Stauch was hearing things that weren't there or seeing things that weren't there. Why do you note that in your report? What's the relevance of that?
During competency evaluations, we are taking into consideration what defendants say to us, but we are also observing them, looking for any signs of mental illness. Given that psychosis is one of the biggest things that we see for people who are eventually found incompetent, We're always assessing for psychosis in these types of evaluations. Individuals with psychotic disorders sometimes don't have the insight or awareness that they're ill. So we are looking to see if they are evidencing any signs that would indicate that they are potentially distracted, potentially hearing something that might not be, oh, I want to say audible, but might not really be in the room, or whether they might be otherwise distracted by symptoms of psychosis.
Did you see any symptoms of psychosis with Ms. Stout during any of your interviews with her during your entire time you spent with her?
None.
Does that also apply to insanity? Is psychosis something that you may be looking for in a defendant claiming to be not guilty by reason of insanity?
Yes.
Same reasons or different reasons?
With sanity, I would say that the number of qualifying mental illnesses is even more narrow than issues of competency or incompetency. But frequently, for sanity, psychosis is one of the primary issues that might result in somebody ultimately being opined insane at the time of the crime or found insane at the time of the crime. There are other mental illnesses that could qualify for that, but the specific legal definition of insanity requires a mental disease or defect, and the definition of that is essentially a mental illness that impairs one's perceptions or understanding of reality, which is psychosis.
And of course, that would have to go back to the time of the crime, that they were experiencing some kind of psychosis at the time of the crime. And that's what led them to commit the crime, perhaps? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, a psychosis or some other mental illness that impairs the perceptions and understanding of reality.
Is psychosis common with people who are found to be legally insane?
It is one of the primary reasons that might lead to somebody being found legally insane.
Can you give the jury, I'll say hypothetical because I don't want to infringe on anybody's rights, but a hypothetical of someone who might be insane at the time a crime is committed based on psychosis?
Sure. I think an obvious example might be, let's say, somebody who is diagnosed with schizophrenia. Maybe they started to exhibit signs and symptoms of schizophrenia during their early adulthood. They have a strong background or history documenting their schizophrenia, and then let's say they do murder a family member because they believe they have a delusion that that individual isn't really their family member, but is some sort of imposter trying to take over the government, and they are therefore trying to save the world by murdering this particular individual.
And so what's the second part of the insanity evaluation that you look at? Because it's much more than just having a severe mental disease or defect, isn't it?
Yes.
What's the second and third component of the insanity evaluation?
So the first one is whether they meet the threshold of a mental disease or defect. And then the definition of insanity here in the state of Colorado, there's two parts. The first one is that mental illness impairs their understanding of right from wrong. The second part is whether that mental illness impairs their capacity to form the specific intent as it's written in the specific crime charged.
Is that also referred to as the specific culpable mental state?
Yes.
And it could be intent, could be knowingly, could be recklessly, could be after deliberation, that kind of thing?
Correct.
And so I want to talk about the right from wrong in an insanity case, and I'll use your hypothetical. A family member is murdered due to the belief that they're going to take over the government, and they felt like they had to kill. Is that basically what we're saying?
Yes.
And the mental disease that it's severe enough to cause them to think that. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, the mental disease or defect has to be tied directly to their understanding of what was going on at the time of the crime, potentially their motivation, their behavior, their emotions, and their thought processes at that time.
And so if they did not have the capacity to know right from wrong, they would think it would be right to kill that family.
Right, essentially for a greater good.
So would they do anything to cover up the fact that they killed that family member if they thought it was the right thing to?
In the sanity evaluations that I and some of my colleagues have conducted, sometimes people don't, and sometimes people do.
Is there also an issue, well, I mean, in your hypothetical, would it be uncommon if someone was truly legally insane to say, what's the problem here? I had to kill this person. Don't you understand that?
I want to say that we do frequently see that where the individuals stick around following the actual murder. They don't run away. They don't try to hide. They don't try to obscure evidence.
And the second aspect of it, forming the culpable mental state or having the capacity to do that, is it really the nature of the killing that kind of dictates their actions, determine whether or not they had the capacity to form that intent?
Yeah, when it comes to the capacity associated with the specific mental state, as evaluators, we take a look at the statutory language associated with each of the crimes to see what is the mental state that we're looking at. And we look at those definitions, with intent, specifically discusses whether they have a conscious objective in mind. Knowingly is more of whether they have an awareness that their actions are going to cause a behavior, or that their actions are going to cause a result. Recklessly is whether they are consciously not paying attention to the fact that their actions could cause a result. So we take a look at those definitions and we think through that cognitively in terms of what were they demonstrating at the time of the offense, even in their own self-report. What are they saying that they were thinking? What are they saying about their own behavior? And we're really looking at whether or not they have the capacity to make judgments, reasons to think things through.
Is the type of weapon that may be used, does that come into consideration when you're making that type of evaluation?
It can be. I would say it's not often a central focus of the evaluation.
Let's jump into your insanity evaluation of Ms. Stauch, okay? Let me see how we're doing on, Judge, we're doing okay on time? All right.
Yeah.
We now are in February of 2022. Defendant pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Is it the same process on how the state hospital is informed and then you and Dr. Gray are appointed to do the evaluation for the insanity?
Yes.
So did you request anything in addition in the discovery, the police reports, things like that, in preparation for your insanity evaluation?
We did. For the sanity evaluation, similarly to the competency evaluation, one of the first things we do is consult with both sides, defense and prosecution, to ask why was the issue of sanity raised, what are the concerns you might have, or lack thereof. In our sanity evaluation, we received a number of additional records from defense, Mr. Tellini specifically and his team. We reviewed the discovery material. Again, we reviewed the competency evaluation that had been written by Dr. Grimmett that had been new at that point in time. We also reviewed our own competency evaluation. And in addition, we conducted some collateral phone calls with individuals familiar with Ms. Stauch.
And who did you contact, the individuals who are familiar with Ms. Stauch?
We spoke with Al Stauch, her ex-husband. We also spoke with Brenda Acquard, her aunt. We made attempts to contact three other individuals, but were unsuccessful.
And as part of the things that you talked about with Mr. Cellini and his team, was that obtaining hospital records, medical background on Ms. Stauch for your review?
Yes,
And did they provide you with medical records for your review?
they did.
Did they provide you with any medical records from Canada from this alleged inpatient psychiatric treatment that Ms. Stauch's telling you about?
There was ultimately nothing from Canada.
Again, I'm jumping ahead. I apologize. But during the interview, did Ms. Stauch talk to you about a Dr. Fleischman or Fleischman? Does that sound familiar?
Yes,
And was that an individual that she said she was having therapy with for a year in Florida?
yes.
Did you get any records from a Dr. Fleischman with regards to psychiatric treatment that he may have done with the defendant?
We ultimately didn't. If I'm remembering correctly, Ms. Stauch told us that we could receive that information from a social worker working on her defense team, an individual named Kyle. But ultimately, the only thing associated with Florida that we received was a letter that accepted her into intensive treatment at House of Freedom.
What was that about? Do you recall?
Our understanding of House of Freedom is that it's essentially some sort of residential treatment for substance use. But Ms. Stauch clarified for us that all of that had been in error, that she had gone for just a day, but didn't stay when she realized what it was for.
Did you have any indication back in her personal background that she even lived in Florida for a year period?
There was nothing to my recollection that she lived in Florida, just that she frequented Florida.
And I apologize. I already asked you who you talked to on the phone, the relatives.
You did.
Okay. Did you review the discovery again in preparation for your insanity evaluation?
Yes,
And why did you do that?
because 2 years had passed, and sometimes it's very hard to remember who you saw a couple of weeks ago, let alone a couple of years ago.
Sure. So tell us about the interview, and we're going to get into some video portions for the court's benefit. I don't, if the court wants me to jump into the videos before the break, or we can wait and do it after the break.
Let's try to go about 3:15.
Okay.
I don't know where that puts your evidence, but let's try and do that.
Well, at this time, there is a stipulation for the admission of the forensic interview for the insanity evaluation that was conducted on March 24th and June 29th of 2022. And so in my hand, I have People's Exhibits 723 through 728. Each exhibit is a morning or afternoon session with the interview with Ms. Stauch. And they're broken up based on how we received them in discovery.
And defense, do you agree?
Your Honor, that's correct. We had stipulated that both insanity evaluations performed by Dr. Torres and Dr. Gray, we submitted evidence, as well as the videotape recording by Dr. Lewis will be submitted as evidence. Well, we're not, neither side is going to play the entirety of all the interviews, but then bits and pieces may be played as each party wishes.
All right. I think for purposes of the record, though, because there's 6 of them and they are all videos, but it sounds like they're of different sections. For purposes of the record, you need to identify what each one is.
Sure, Your Honor. And if it helps, People's Exhibit 723 is labeled Stauch, March 24th, 22-1. People's Exhibit 724 is labeled Stauch, March 24th, 2022-2. People's Exhibit 725 is labeled Stauch, March 24th, 2022-3. People's Exhibit 726 is Stauch, June 29th, 2022, 1. People's 727 is labeled Stauch, June 29th, 2022, 2. And People's Exhibit 728 is labeled Stauch, June 29th, 2022, 3.
Right, exhibit 723 through 728 will be admitted. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just get to my notes here. What I'd like to do now, Dr. Torres, is I want to play a portion of your interview that was conducted on March 24th, 2022, which is a portion of People's Exhibit 723. And then I'm going to have some follow-up questions afterwards. This is about 7 minutes long.
From where?
Over here.
We're going to play it on the TV screens.
Oh, I'm at the feed.
And so for the record, we're going to play People's Exhibit 723, starting at 18:28 in the interview and stopping at 25:32.
Dr. Torres, I've given everybody else the option, if you would. It's only about 7 minutes, but if you want to step down and be somewhere else, if you want to stay there, that's okay too.
I think this is okay. Thank you.
You mentioned that
I just want to make sure the volume's good, Your Honor. We paused it at 18:32.
High as it'll go.
around the time this went
Did you want to ask the jury if that was sufficient volume?
That work, that's about as high as it'll go anyway, so not much I can do about it after
We have
that.
some control over here too. It's not all the way up on here yet either.
Okay. All right, sounds like,
started creating different personalities. Yeah, could you tell us more about that? So I wasn't allowed to go to people's houses in the night, or I was scared to let people come to my house and spend the night, because I didn't ever know if he was gonna have like an episode. Like when we had like episodes, we have to like run into the car and drive around till he passed out and sleep, you know, and then sneak back in the house. So I didn't ever know, like if I had friends staying for the weekend, like I didn't want them to be exposed to that, you know, because people pick on, you know, in school, people pick on, you know. So that, around the time I was like 10 or 11, I just started like almost like being able to like take myself out of the situation and let another part of me be the one get molested. And that was when I came with Harmony, and Harmony can like tell you about abuse and death. I try not to do it because I've stored it in a place far away, you know what I mean? But so I started let Harmony be the one be molested and not me, because that way if my friends ever ask me, you know, like why come you can't come over, I could create like a perfect picture in my world that you can come over one day, it'll be great, we'll do this, we'll play ball, we'll hang out. I didn't want them to go to that world where they had to know like we live in abuse. I was getting molested because my friends would have been like their moms and stuff like that would have been like, you need to tell somebody, you need to do this. So. And I was always scared of losing softball too, so that was like my outlet. So you created her. Mm-hmm. And it's a personality, so did you create anyone else? Remember I told you I lived in a trailer? That was in 1996. That was during the Olympics. The U.S. Women's Gymnastics team that won a gold medal. And that, I played another personality doing that. That's Christina Brigana, and she's friends with like Carrie Strug, Dominic Dawes, and a bunch of people that are on the team. And like I had the whole trailer to myself, so she would like be able to like create apparatuses and like do like balance beams off stuff, you know, like 'cause maybe days my mom would be gone, you know, and so that was just the way I would cope with, no, and not knowing if my mom was ever going to take us back there, because I knew she would. Every time she said she was never going back, we'd go back. So that helped me deal with that year, because I had to stay really good in school, you know what I mean, because my plan was like to get out one day, you know, do really good, which I did end up doing really good in school. You know, I have a doctorate degree, but like, if it wasn't for being able to use these different, I guess you could probably like personas or whatever. I wouldn't have been able to live with her.
We have Harmony. Christina was the other one.
That was from when I was little. As I got older, there was more like Letecia, and there's Taylor, and there's Maria, she's protector. They like, I don't, sometimes, like if you look at like a lot of my different social medias, they have different names. Person code. Different page, different one point. You could always tell if you're gonna play softball because like if I was in Letecia, like Letecia, I'm ambidextrous, so I could hit left-handed and right-handed, and like sometimes people wouldn't understand when I go to the plate, and they'd be like, hey, you need to hit left-handed, and you need to, like, cause there'd be like a runner, if you know, like baseball, if there's like a runner in second and third, they're like, you need to hit left-handed, but if I was in that personality, I couldn't hit left-handed.
We have, as you got older, there was Letecia Taylor. You said Taylor was the protector.
Yeah, Taylor's my main no, Maria's my protector. Taylor's my main personality.
Thank you. Maria.
Victoria is the only personality that I have like empathy in because I store so much of, you know, trauma. If you want me to like be, like if a friend's talking to me and they need me to give them advice, I have to switch to Victoria to actually probably be empathetic at all. Like severely empathetic, you know what I mean? I just don't have to.
All right. Taylor's the main personality. Maria's the protector. Victoria is the one who has the most empathy and kindness.
And then Letecia, she's bipolar, she would be doing the most, like, you'll notice when I'm on Letecia, actually the psychiatrist the other day came to take my meds, he was doing the most, she's bipolar sick, and she was up for 4 or 5, 6 days at a time, you know, so. I think it's Kepler or something like that.
You're currently on Kepler.
Kept something, yeah, that. Kept from. I was gonna put me back on those Zyprexa, but I'll be eating too much on it. I don't like it.
So who are we talking to right now?
Yeah, okay.
When you say Taylor is the main personality, what do you mean by that?
It's like, okay, so you notice like where Letecia, she's like more like into her like thug life. I guess you can say like rap music, that kind of thing. But Taylor's everything is like Letecia or wanted to be because she gets to be like, yeah, kind to everybody, but like successful. She has a whole separate world, you know. She's married to Tyler. They have kids.
This is everything that Taylor wanted to be, and Letecia is married to Tyler.
No. Taylor is everything Letecia. You got it backwards. Yeah, Taylor is married to Tyler and have 3 kids, Ariana, Alicia, and Adriano.
Okay, we stopped it at 25:32. Before we get into what Ms. Stauch had to say here, who is present during this interview?
It was just Ms. Stauch, myself, and Dr. Gray.
And why was there no attorneys in there with you?
We don't typically allow the attorneys to be in sanity evaluations with us.
Why is that?
The primary reason is because we would want to prevent any potential interference by an attorney, whether it would be a prosecutor or a defense attorney or somebody telling the defendant to withhold any information or to elaborate further on any information.
And was that Miss Stauch that we saw in the video?
Yes,
Is it the same Miss Stauch that's seated to my left with her head down on a notebook here in between the two attorneys?
it is.
May the record reflect identification of the defendant.
The record will so reflect. Go ahead.
So let's talk about what she's saying. What impact does it have when she says, I created these personalities?
When it comes to dissociative identity disorder, that's not the understanding in terms of what that looks like. It's not about creating or having control over several distinct personalities.
And so what is dissociative identity disorder and why do you say that's not about it?
Dissociative identity disorder, in short, it's when somebody is experiencing two or more personality states, and it's usually accompanied by some sort of amnesia, blackouts, a period of not remembering what you were doing. It's a complex diagnosis. Essentially, the different personality states themselves are not controlled. When an individual has this diagnosis, they might not even initially be aware that they are exhibiting different personality traits, hence the blackouts or the loss of memory for periods of time. And the emergence of these different personality states, we call them alters, but the emergence of them can be very random, not necessarily I'm going to now go into this personality state and now I'm going to go into the second personality state. So the fact that she told us that she created them herself, in terms of our conceptualization, we started to wonder about the possibility that she was exaggerating or feigning this particular diagnosis.
And does this relate back to the competency evaluation when you asked her directly about the way she answered on the psychological testing with regards to, I believe you said 3 different personalities?
That, I would say, was more in retrospect. When we were doing the sanity evaluation, I don't even recall remembering that specific detail from the competency evaluation.
When you went back and reviewed that, that's when you saw that detail?
Yes.
Okay. What about the fact that she mentions that one of her personalities or her personas was involved with the gymnastic team and that she's friends with the gymnastics team? Is that something unusual, perhaps, to have that persona?
Again, for me, it was her report that this was a creation of hers, and that it's associated with something that was happening, per her report, in 1996, the Olympics that year. And if I'm remembering correctly, she noted that that was just another personality that she created at that time.
With people who actually suffer from dissociative identity disorder, would they know the other personas?
Sometimes.
Explain.
So it's going to be, I'm going to say, case by case dependent, but the research suggests that the clinical presentation of a dissociative identity disorder, they used to think that there was no memory or awareness of these other personalities that one might be experiencing. But now it's thought to be more porous, meaning that there is some awareness that this might be happening, but it's going to be a case by case thing.
Okay. We're going to see some more examples of this in some video takes, but just one last question about this. You mentioned earlier that there's some amnesia or blackouts. Would people who suffer from dissociative identity disorder remember what they did when they are in another personality?
They might have some awareness of it, and sometimes they might not.
Is it on a spectrum? Are there more severe issues with people who may suffer from that diagnosis than others?
Yes.
And is that consistent with all the mental illnesses in the DSM-5? Some are worse than others depending on the person.
Yes, even within a particular diagnosis, someone might have a more severe presentation than another person.
The next portion of the video we're going to watch is, looks like it's close to 10 minutes long. It's going to be on People's Exhibit 724, starting at 1448 and ending at 2455. Again, if you want to sit back here or sit up there, whatever you're more comfortable.
This is fine, thank you.
Yes.
And just decided to get married, so that would happen, so I think we probably should have, for real, like, that would come. But it was to keep from having to do those crazy things that were without custody. We wanted to make sure whatever we did never hurt anything to do with children. So it was good on that, but then early in our marriage, Albert goes to Oklahoma. He's away at Oklahoma, he's away in Colorado Springs for training. And I'm taking care of the kids on his weekends to make sure he didn't lose his weekend. So I would have the kids on his weekend, but he would be in Oklahoma and he'd be in Colorado Springs. So like a lot of our marriage, I'd say 85% of it, we never even lived together. We never lived together until Colorado, like officially lived together. Because, yeah, that was when we moved to Colorado Springs. Because we moved to Colorado Springs in March, but he didn't come yet from Alaska. Now I got the kids in school and stuff, so we really didn't live together. And so I started working at French, and I got back from probably graduating high school, and then we had all went on a cruise. So really, it was August 2019 when we actually like lived together. So it was more of like almost like a convenience. Like I feel like the marriage of convenience was I did everything for the kids. I took care of the kids. You know what I'm saying? I worked and we could buy whatever we wanted because we both had really good incomes. And I know that whatever, but that's the truth. You know what I mean? That's what it more so like.
When you started dating Albert, were you still living in North Carolina?
So this was South Carolina.
Living in South Carolina.
I was living in South Carolina for South Carolina.
Did you and Albert ever have any problems?
No, like, okay, so our mom is a nurse practitioner for a psychiatrist. A lot of extensive experience in psychiatry. She would constantly tell Albert, I needed to be on medication or I need to be doing this throughout our whole marriage. You know what I mean? So that would cause a lot of problems. Like even if you look at the report that she wrote to police before I got arrested, she talks about, you know, in there about, you know, 1 minute I'm this way, 1 minute I'm that way. You know what I mean? So like basically was married to him and her. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't necessarily a lot of physical. There was not, you know, any physical abuse. It was a lot of emotional abuse. He's a narcissist. So, you know, he's the victim and everything. And he took advantage of my mental, sometimes I way my mental status would be, and like go to his mom about it, and they'd all try to like, you know, tell me I need to be on this meds, or I need help for this, or I'm crazy, you know. So it was more so mental and emotional. You know, there's never any physical up until the end. When we got custody of the kids, he thought I was in cahoots with him, which I guess you can kind of say I was. So if you look at my phone record, you'll see my plan was leaving, but I didn't want to leave the kids. Several messages you can see me say, I don't want to leave the kids because I know they will get taken care of. So we had custody of them, but their mom she started dabbling in drugs. But she wasn't ready to get the kids back yet. So my plan to her was always like, I'm gonna let you know right before I leave. You better have a house, you better have everything together, and then I'll help you get the kids back to Carolina. So when he found out that I, what he calls it, was in cahoots with her, that's when he started getting violent and aggressive, like throwing lamps in the house, throwing, like, there's a video on my phone they have where he stopped the car, because I record it all the time, because I wanted to keep all that evidence for Landon to have. And he's beating the piss out of Gannon, and he's flinging stuff like irate because he thinks we're all in cahoots against him to get the kids back. And he's like, you're just trying to take the kids from me. You're trying to get them back to their mom. So once I got the Colorado Springs and we lived together, that's when it became like that. Never, there was no hitting me with his hands. It was just flinging stuff in the house, being angry, slamming doors, punching doors. Like, he would get like that because he swore down I was working with her. I mean, which I guess you can see it as me working with her, but I felt like if I left, they weren't going to be taken care of. Like, he was going to do schoolwork. He was going to make sure they were clean. Nobody, he wouldn't. So he doesn't have that nurturing piece or that ability to multitask or none of those things. So in a way, I was kind of working with her to get the kids back home, but I guess he took that as me going against him. I was doing what was right for them. You know. I believe it.
And so the kids would have been his two kids.
Right. If you look at all the school paperwork, who always talked to, up until he realized what I was doing, that I was collecting evidence to get the kids back home to her, because she had already promised me that I could see the kids whenever I wanted in Carolina, like, that she would not take them out of my life. She had already told me that. And so, like, once I started collecting, he would notice I'd be driving down the road and I'd have the phone on. And I'd just start collecting everything, because I'm already a paranoid person. But I knew, like, if I start collecting stuff, you know, like, I would have it to give to her for everything. Because I wanted her to get her sobriety first, get a home, whatever. And once he noticed I started doing that, that's when it got a little bit violent with him speaking. I was trying to set him up and take the kids from him. Like, his weren't paranoia. His was just because he knew I was right with him. He knew that everything I was collecting was preparing for when I left. Because if you even look at my phone searches on the evidence, you'll see that, like, I was like looking for a place to stay. I was like getting everything in order. I had already told Gannon, like, on Wednesday, I'm going to call your mother and tell her what's going on, but we gotta wait till Wednesday. The reason I said wait till Wednesday, because I was starting that flight attendant job, and I wanted to make sure that everything had went through my flight attendant, that I had been like officially hired. I was going to the training, everything before I said something to her that, hey, I'm leaving. You know what I mean? Here's our plan. This is what we're going to do to get the kids back. They wanted to go with me, but I told them, I was like, don't charge me with kidnapping. If you don't call the country, we got to have a plan, you know, so. But that was always the plan. So they can call it cahoots, whatever they want to call it, but my plan was to make sure I know that Rhonda and Matt would take care of that. Landon's mom and dad. I know as long as they, because when I was in South Carolina and I had the kids, they were the only two people that helped me with anything I had by myself. So I knew they would be safe with them. Whatever I needed to do to prepare them to have them, that was the application. So.
And about how many months, maybe before this alleged offense happened, did things take that where he really became aggressive?
I know it sounds minimal. I've created so many different personas in my life, in so many different ways to cope with everything I've been through. The sunlight is one of them. Like being in somewhere warm, being somewhere where I can use those coping skills to help me when I have a flashback, you know, when I wake up from a nightmare, so I tried to talk to him about it. And I said, hey, Colorado and me just don't, you know, like it's causing me to get worse mentally. I was having more of my manic episodes. I was just like having more episodes where I forget and loss of time. And a lot of it was because I didn't have those coping skills. Like, you can't play softball here in Colorado. You know what I mean? Not during the months that I'm used to playing back home. And so, you know, all these skills I built over time were taken from me in Colorado. So when I got here officially in August, it was weird because I had to do outside duty work too. For teaching, you know, to have like outside duty, stuff like that. I was freezing in September, you know, and I was like, I wanted to do something else, or let me go be a flight attendant where I could do warm sometimes. And I'll set my schedule where I'll be with the kids a few days a week, and I'll be a flight attendant a few days a week. Because I knew mentally I needed that outlet because I'd used it all my life. That's when he took offense to it, of like, if you're gonna be a flight attendant, there's nobody gonna be here to watch the kids. And I was like, I'll be here on these days, but these days I want. So that was around September, October of 2019. Because I had applied for a flight attendant job and I was supposed to start it the next year because they would have like a waiting list or whatever. That's when it got like that, when he saw that I was actually going to be leaving or being gone part-time. He can't operate without having someone do everything. So that's.
We just stopped it at 24:55. Before we get into the content of what Ms. Stauch is saying, could you give the jury understanding of the form of questions you're asking? In other words, are you suggesting the answer when you ask questions, or are you wanting to get information from her, and explain why you do that?
Sure. During a lot of these forensic evaluations, we like to ask questions in an open-ended manner to give the defendant the opportunity to explain their life story or their perceptions to us. We try to avoid, to the best of our ability, yes or no answers. We definitely don't like to feed them information, especially when it relates to diagnosis that they can then regurgitate back to us or to someone else. So the questions we ask tend to be open-ended.
And is that what we see in this last segment we saw? Is that kind of how the entire interview went? You would ask a question and you would get a answer and there would be rambling and there'd be nonstop talking. Is that the sense of how the whole evaluation went?
She did have a tendency to ramble during our evaluation. I think that there were times where maybe we asked a question, especially as it pertained to the offense, where she spoke at length, easily 30 minutes, 40 minutes before we asked any follow-up.
And with regards to the segment we just watched, did you or Dr. Gray ask questions about her relationship with Al shortly before the crime?
We did.
And is that the response we're seeing where she's talking about, I was gonna leave Al, that kind of thing?
Yes, we were trying to understand the nature of her relationship with Mr. Stauch since it's relevant to this case.
And did you have an opportunity to listen to several pretext phone calls that were conducted between Al Stauch and the defendant, Letecia Stauch?
Yes.
And is what she's saying in this last segment consistent with what she's saying in these pretext calls, where she's asking him, are we going to be together? Are we going to get back together, bring our family back together, over and over and over again?
I do remember that from the pretext calls. Yes, this report would be inconsistent with that specifically. And I might suggest that both things could be true at the same time.
Sure. It's complicated, right? It's a relationship. You don't know all the behind the scenes information that's going on. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
How about when you talked to Al Stauch on the phone as part of your insanity evaluation? Did he give you information about their relationship just prior to Gannon being killed?
He also noted that things were rocky, to say the least, that there had been some thoughts about separating and that no actions had been taken at that time.
What about when she talks about living in Colorado and not being able to play softball and she needs to be in the sun, that kind of thing? Was that any relevance to your evaluation when it comes to insanity?
When it comes to insanity, the primary focus of that evaluation does tend to be at the time of the offense. And it's helpful for us to have an understanding what the defendant was going through. I'd say even up to a couple of weeks before the actual event, just to understand what was their emotional state, what symptoms might they have been exhibiting at that time. Did they undergo any particular stressors that could have exacerbated symptoms of mental illness at that time?
I want to talk about the stressors. When we talk about dissociative identity disorder, is there a triggering event that might commonly be seen in people who suffer from that mental illness that causes them to switch personalities?
There can be, and at the same time, it can be random.
In this clip, again, she mentions switching personalities. Do you recall her saying something about that?
I'm trying to remember specifically what was said during this clip. Would you be able to remind me?
Sure. She mentioned something about being able to switch personas based on the weather and how she can adapt to different things. And do you recall that line of her answer? If you don't, it's not that.
Not specifically, no.
Your Honor, this would be a good time to take a break if the court likes.
I was going to ask about that, actually. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will take our afternoon break. If we can have everyone back in the jury room at, say, 3:30, we should be able to start on time at that point. Again, don't discuss the case among yourselves. Don't discuss the case with anyone else. With that, all rise for the jury, please. Thank you, Dale. Seated. Court will recall 20 CR 1358. Letecia Stauch record should reflect the jury has returned to the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to talk to you just very briefly because of something that Mr. Combs said to me. Regulation of room temperature in this room has been challenging. So I want you all to know that if you need to bring something in, such as a jacket, a parka, a scarf, a wool cap, or gloves, mittens, those sorts of things, if you need to bring that in and you've forgotten to do it, and you've left it back in the room and we need to take a break for you to go get that, we're happy to do that. So just let us know if that's an issue. So with that, Mr. Young.
Thanks, Judge. Same thing for you. If you need
I
to
appreciate
call-
it. Thank you.
You and I didn't have an opportunity to go over these videos prior to your testimony. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so you don't know what's coming up on the next video. Is that a fair statement?
I don't.
I'm going to do a better job of kind of giving you a preview of that, and then I'll ask you what to look for. Would that work for you?
Yes.
Okay. So the next video is we're still on People's Exhibit 724. We're going to fast forward to 1 hour and 19 minutes and 26 seconds. We're going to play a 3-minute clip. In this video, I'd like you to watch for evidence of dissociative identity disorder, and then I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions on what that means to your evaluation of Ms. Stauch in that disorder based on what we see on the clip. Is that fair?
Okay.
All right. So with that, Your Honor, we'll like to play 1 hour, 19 minutes and 26 seconds, and we'll stop it at 1 hour, 22 and 25 seconds.
Has this thing, okay? So Letecia believes that Sam Hunt are always together. Y'all know who Sam Hunt is? Country singer, right? Okay, so he always like kind of laughs at me about this because I be telling him Sam Hunt writes these songs about me all the time, you know what I mean? And so we went through, when I'd be in my bipolar episodes, like we had everybody convinced back home that Sam Hunt was Harley's dad because Hunt's their last name, you know what I mean? And then I don't know, because I be getting like this ego of like, why wouldn't you want me like, I still do the same thing now, even at the jail, when I don't even have nothing but an orange suit. You know what I mean? But I still be thinking the most, you know what I'm saying? So, like, I am aware of the discrepancies in my personalities and being, you know, working with special needs kids throughout the time I have. I know when I recognize something's abnormal to be around somebody. I'll be like that, and then next thing you know, I won't come out of my room. Especially around like holidays and stuff like that. Like, I won't come out of my room. I'll just be sitting in my room the whole time. Like in my marriage, Albert would be like, "Won't you come in here and watch TV?" And I'd be like, "No, I'm standing here." "Why do you want to stay in here?" But then I go into the mode of like, well, I mean, I spent a lot of time in my closet growing up. Why not? You know? And I would just not eat, flow with me. You know, the world's gonna end. I want to die. You know? And then I'd fluctuate back into it again. So, like common sense, I knew something, you know, wasn't right. Like I'm not a stable person. I'm not a person that you're gonna say that being a professional that I am. Went through all this time with schooling. How do you think I did it? It's because I didn't sleep. You know what I mean? I'd be so excited. I'd be doing this degree and that degree and that degree. How did I get them all? Because of those times. But then there'd be times when I wouldn't be turning in my schoolwork, and I'd have to message the teacher and be like, "Look, the best right now. You know, like next week I'll catch up and do 3 weeks worth of work, but just not this week." You know, and so like you learn that's just not normal. Like. If you guys, one of y'all came to work with each other like that, and you consistently came like that, you'd be thinking one of two things. Are you on drugs? Or is something really wrong? And I don't do drugs. So, like, the more that happened, you know, like, I became cognizant of it. And then Harley, as she got older, she started noticing. She was like, "Mom, you'll be this personality, then you'll be this one, and then I don't even know sometimes." And she just learned to, like, you know, like, to deal with it. And then sometimes they can't even pry me out of the room because I won't leave for days. You know, so as it happens more, you.
Okay, so we stopped it at 122.25. She's talking about discrepancies in her personalities and that she's aware of them. Do you recall her saying that?
Yes.
Tell the jury, how does that impact, if it impacts it at all, your diagnosis or lack of diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder?
Well, as noted before, awareness of the different personality states in dissociative identity disorder, it's complicated in that you can be aware of them, and at the same time, you might not be so aware of others. But that being said, when I watch those clips, despite what Ms. Stauch is saying, to me, it sounds like she's trying to explain different mood states as opposed to different personality states. And it sounds to me as though she's trying to explain to us that she can be manic and then depressive or have depression, kind of reflecting a bipolar disorder. But what's particularly marking is that idea that she can anticipate when she's going to come out of a depression. As she noted in the video, she talks about having all this energy to have all of these degrees, and then she might be depressed, not want to come out of her room. She might not do the work associated with teaching that she's supposed to be doing, but she can catch up on it the following week when she comes out of this depressive state. I mean, in bipolar disorder, again, you can't anticipate or plan when you're going to be manic or when you're going to be depressed. Those are not things that one can control.
Regardless of what was going on with Ms. Stauch when she was in school, she was able to complete her schooling and eventually obtain a doctorate degree. Is that fair?
Yes, that's what she said.
So when you talk about she may have been depressed at some time, it didn't mean she didn't black out and forget about the schoolwork. She just knew she had to go back and do it in a future time or at a later time.
That's how it sounds to me.
She also mentions in this clip that Harley, her daughter, knew about her different personalities. Do you recall her saying that?
Yes.
Did you or Dr. Gray try to contact Harley Hunt, her daughter, during the course of your evaluation?
We did.
Were you able to talk to her?
We talked to her only briefly, but we never were able to conduct an interview with her.
And why is that? Do you know?
Ultimately, she said that she needed to seek some legal counsel before she could speak to us.
Do you know whether or not Harley Hunt eventually talked to law enforcement at some point during this investigation?
My understanding is that she eventually did.
And do you know whether or not she actually testified in this trial?
I'm aware that she testified.
Would it be surprising to you that she testified that she didn't know anything about her mom?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This is an inappropriate question asking this witness to comment on.
No, I think you can I think the question is phrased is objectionable. You, number one, you are reciting what some other witness had to say and you can't testify. Number two, I think that you can rephrase the question to ask her in a hypothetical fashion, if a witness had testified or if the facts were to establish X, what would be your opinion? I think you can do that.
And I understand. I'll rephrase the question, Your Honor. If Harley Hunt said something inconsistent with what Ms. Stauch said in the video, would that impact your decision on whether or not she had? Well, let me strike that. Would that tell you whether or not she was being credible when she told you that Harley was aware about her different personalities?
I'm going to object to the question asking her to comment on the credibility of the witness.
Sustained. You can't ask somebody to comment on the credibility of someone else. You can ask her whether or not it would be consistent or inconsistent, but you can't say that it's credible or not.
Well, we're talking about Ms. Stauch. You're doing an evaluation and you're relying on her self-reporting to certain things. Is that fair?
Yes.
Would that self-reporting be impacted if you knew Harley Hunt said something inconsistent with what she said on the video?
I'd say collateral information is always very helpful in these types of evaluations.
And obviously, at the time that you're doing the video interview with Ms. Stauch, Harley Hunt was not cooperating with you or anyone else. Is that right?
I don't know if she was cooperating with anyone else. She just politely declined to participate in our interview with her.
Okay. The next clip I'm going to play is at 1 hour and 27 minutes and 34 seconds. We're going to stop it at 1 hour and 33 minutes and 24 seconds. And in this particular clip, Ms. Stauch will be talking about delusions or hearing things. And then I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions about what she says about that, okay?
Okay.
So with that, we can start the next clip.
Minutes ago, you said, you hear voices, that they're all your personality,
Right.
and that's it.
Yeah, and the devil. But you know, there's always the devil. The devil is trying to tell you to do something. Like when I was on the hike in January 26, the devil was telling me to jump off the height because it had to be a white family to jump off the height. That's the devil. That's like cosmic powers trying to like come in and intervene. That's going to be with all of us. You know what I'm saying? The closer you are to God, the devil's going to come get you all the time. You know what I mean? But as far as like, you know, I don't believe in this whole thing that people say, and no disrespect to y'all, even jobs, but for me, I don't believe in this whole thing where people say, oh, these people are talking to them. These are your cosmic powers and your personalities. Like, all my personalities are going to talk to me and be like, why don't you just slap that girl? And I'd be like, no, I'm not. Like, those type of things. But I don't think with these people beyond this whole best thing and maybe doing that stuff. Like, none of that. But there's always the devil that has you to do that. You know what I mean? Like running a Jeep off in the form of chance for you to run a Jeep off. You know what I mean? But I don't believe in the other stuff. So, you know.
So you don't believe in which other stuff?
Right. I be seeing people come in and they be on meds and they be swearing up and down like, you know, like, oh, these people were telling them to do this. And I'm like, what? You know what I mean? It's only gonna be the devil. Like the devil told me to jump off a hot different. It ain't gonna be just random people sitting out somewhere telling you this. Like, this ain't how it works. You know what I mean? Yes, does my different personalities tell me to do different things? Yes, but that's still a part of me, just in a separate world. That's not, you know, I don't know. I just feel like they be just a little bit delusional like that. So I believe in, if anybody's saying anything wrong, that's the devil or that's yourself. I mean, you got 5 cells, it's them. It ain't, if you, that's people not on drugs like me, no. People that be on meth and all that. Like I be seeing them coming there and they be swearing up and down, you know, the most craziest stuff is going on. Like I don't believe in that. I feel like it's the devil. No, have I? Yes. I've been in forms of psychosis in my life where I saw things. Or maybe you can call them delusions. But on a regular basis, no. Like if I'm in a different world, like if I go to a world like a Janelle's world, I see everything Janelle sees. But that's because I've created those worlds. I've been able to be like, I know what Janelle does. Or if I go to Christina Browning and I'm doing gymnastic stuff around cell, like I know that I can make a balance beam, or you know, I put apparatus out or whatever. But I know those are things that I leave this place to go to that place, so I put them. You see what I'm saying? It's not something that, you know, there's, you know, oh, that looks like the sun is in here. Like, no, it's not like that. I actually created those worlds. I know what goes in them. I put it there. You know what I mean?
Sounds like it's almost a conscious choice on your part.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Except Maria. Now, I don't have choice in that part because I can't control going to Maria. That I can switch back and forth, but I cannot switch to Maria without it being triggered. Like you'd have to put me like under some like, you know, drug-induced setting or something to trigger to get Maria. I can't forcefully switch to her, but everyone else I can because it's a conscious way of doing it, you know. Like every time I go to court, I tell Miss Robinson, the lady out here, she goes with me to court, I'll be like, bye-bye, Miss Robinson, I'm leaving. She's like, don't leave yet. And I just go to a whole other world. Like sometimes I'll be calling my name. She'll have to like snap me out of it. And I'll just be in a whole different thing doing all different stuff. But I've created that as a way to deal with things in life. It's not something that, that is like a chemical imbalance or something, I don't think. I think it's just me. But then Maria though, she's a trained sniper now, so she can do the most.
Where did she get training?
So Maria does for hire. She got trained from Russia. She does for hire, but she's from Mexico. She got trained for hire. She does $1,500 per minute. She does different things. That includes everything. Like, so you see her come out, she's talking about eliminate this person, eliminate that person, but it's only certain people. It's pedophiles, people that like sexually molest people, people that rape people, like those that need to be eliminated from the planet. These are people, you can say, well, you're a Christian, you're supposed to not say that, but Maria's not Christian, so she don't say that. Those are people that just need to be completely wiped off the face of the planet. Because if you're gonna sit there and hurt a child and pedophile and molest them and all that, then you need to be breathing.
So we stopped it at 133.24. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yes, there is.
Let's start with her conversations about the devil and the devil telling her to do things. Okay. What's your take on that?
Our take on that is ultimately, it seemed like an exaggerated symptom, that one specifically. She talked about auditory hallucinations, hearing personality states, again, in dissociative identity disorder. The research related to clinical presentation says that's possible. Hearing the devil wouldn't be associated with a dissociative identity disorder. Hearing the devil could be associated with a psychosis. But again, given Ms. Stauch's history, there's nothing there to corroborate that she's had any significant psychosis that persist, that one might hear that symptom and say that symptom goes with this particular clinical presentation. What was also striking was, at least as it pertains to issues of psychosis, is that individuals who do have a psychotic disorder specifically are usually hesitant to draw attention to their symptoms. They can be difficult to assess because they might deny symptoms, or they might just withhold information as it pertains to those. So the fact that Ms. Stauch just very openly told us about this hallucination, hearing the devil and hearing the devil at different moments of her life, it's just not a particularly credible symptom in the way that she presented it.
The way she presented it was in reference to the hike that took place on January 26th. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And so, for the sake of argument, if in fact the devil was communicating with her, did she have ability to say, no, I'm not going to jump off a cliff? In other words, she didn't listen to the devil.
Yeah, that's important.
Why is that important?
When it comes to issues of psychosis, people sometimes hear hallucinations that command them or tell them they should behave in a particular manner. Some individuals with psychosis have difficulty controlling their behavior in light of that, and some people can control their behavior in light of that. It kind of depends how sick they are at the time.
And she mentions again to you and Dr. Gray, incidentally, Dr. Gray is asking specific questions about psychosis, it sounds like, during this portion of the interview.
Yes.
And she understood those questions and is responding to those questions. Is that fair?
Yes.
She starts to talk about her different worlds. And was that a common theme throughout the interview?
Yes, generally speaking, whenever she spoke of these other personality states, she frequently talked about how she created the personality states, she created the worlds, she could move from one world to another on her own volition, with the exception of Maria.
Now, how does that fit into a diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder? Do people who suffer from that disorder describe their different personalities as going to different worlds?
I've never assessed somebody with a legitimate dissociative identity disorder to be able to know if that's how they usually describe it or not. What strikes me is that it's convenient that the one personality that is particularly important and relevant to this evaluation is the one that she has no access to.
Talk about that in just a second. But with regards to going to this worlds, for instance, too much information, but when I'm having a problem trying to go to sleep, I go to a beach and I think about sitting on that beach and listening to the ocean. Am I suffering from some kind of dissociative identity disorder because I do that?
I would say that I would need to do a more thorough assessment.
No further questions. Yeah, I did. All right, well, I guess maybe I'm off. I don't know. I'm never going to think about that again. Let's talk about Maria, okay? You just said that there's an exception to her different personalities with Maria. How significant is that to your evaluation?
As I said, Maria ultimately ends up being one of the most relevant personalities associated with the evaluation of her sanity at the time of the offense. She talks about all of these other personalities. She explains to us that she is unaware of a couple of her personalities, that she learns of them through the evidence. She seems more aware of a separate set of personalities. And then when it came to Maria, she said that she could not tell us what Maria was thinking at any given time, just like she noted that she can move from one world to another in these other personality sets, Taylor, Christina. I don't know that I could remember all of the names off of the top of my head. When it came to Maria, she said that she couldn't do that with Maria. But it's also interesting to me that she seems to have an awareness of Maria's existence in terms of her being a trained sniper, where she was trained, the idea that Maria speaks different languages. All of that seems a bit far-fetched to me in terms of this idea of dissociative identity disorder. Because dissociative identity disorder, the minority of, well, I'd say the majority of individuals who experience it as multiple personality states coexisting at the same time within them, which is where the identity confusion comes into play. It's not usually presented so overtly in terms of, I have this separate personality with all of these different qualities than me.
Is it inconsistent to say that she knew this much information about Maria and yet at the same time say she can't control switching over to Maria?
To me, I would think that if she had no access to Maria, I would expect her to have less of an awareness or understanding of that particular personality.
While we're talking about Maria, at some point during the interview with Ms. Stauch, whether it was in March or in June, did you ask to speak to Maria?
We did ask her if we could.
And how did she respond to that?
She essentially said that she couldn't just switch into Maria. She noted that, I think she said a little bit in there that something would have to trigger that particular personality to come out of her. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, during the course of our assessment, she said that we would need to bring out specific evidence or discovery to help her return to that state. Just how she noted that she was aware of these other personalities. We asked about what Maria was thinking at the time of the alleged offense, and that's when Ms. Stauch told us that she could not tell us what Maria was thinking at any point in time.
I'm going to fast forward to November of 2022. Did you review an interview that was conducted by a Dr. Lewis with Ms. Stauch in her insanity evaluation?
I did.
And did you see a portion of that interview where Dr. Lewis said, "Hey, can we speak to Maria?" And then Maria appears talking in a Spanish accent?
Yes,
Was that Ms. Stauch in the interview?
it was.
Was that inconsistent with what you saw when you asked her if you could speak to Maria?
I would say, generally speaking, it seemed to be. Dr. Lewis asked multiple times, to my recollection, before Maria emerged. I also saw Dr. Lewis doing something with handwriting, and I'm not familiar with whatever technique that was.
Okay. We may be watching that at a later time, okay? The next segment I want to talk to you about is reference to Maria again, and it's in reference to an incident that happened when she was being transported from South Carolina to Colorado, where there was an assault on a deputy. Do you recall that information?
Yes,
And do you recall talking to her about that information?
briefly, yes.
Okay, we're going to play this clip and then I'll ask you some more follow-up questions about that. And just so the record's clear, we're still on People's Exhibit 724. We're now at 1 hour and 39 minutes and 2 seconds, and we will stop it at 1 hour and 41 minutes and 10 seconds.
If you look at that report where the drive here, that lady was trying to get me with her gun. And like, you can see on the camera, well, I kept on telling her, like, I knew exactly what she was over there doing and thinking. And I kept telling her, like, I know what you're doing over here. I know you're out to get me. You're trying to shoot me with your gun. Like, I knew all that. You know what I mean? So like, that was a time, an example where it was very heightened, where I was like all over the place thinking they were out to get me with the stuff, and that I was trying to read what she had going on, and she was trying to shoot me with her gun. I don't know if you saw that report, but like, you could see it in there where I keep looking at the cameras telling them this. You know? That was an example of a time that it was like very, very high.
And those perceptions that you get are always accurate, or?
From like the premonitions?
No, when you get really paranoid and it seems like you know what other people are.
Yeah, because like, think about it. In that instance with that lady, that Deputy James, it was accurate. She did have a gun on me. So therefore, what else she been doing with a gun? Pointing at me. She was trying to kill me with it. So like, that was a perfect example why it was accurate, you know what I'm saying? And of course, Maria came. That whole incident happened when Maria came, and she's just going to regulate on them, you know what I mean? So, it's usually always accurate. Like, the whole incident with the guy trying to tell me I hit somebody. I didn't really hit somebody, but these people were out to get me the whole time, and I kept telling them, like, look, there ain't no way I hit somebody. Y'all were setting me up, like, who body and there's no marks. So I knew they were doing that because his last name was Sanchez and Maria's last name is Sanchez. So how did that happen? You know what I mean?
Okay, we stopped it at 1 hour, 41 minutes and 10 seconds. Was it clear to you when you're talking to her that she's saying Maria was the one that kind of took over and assaulted the deputy on the way back from South Carolina?
Yes.
Looking at the interview with Dr. Lewis, where it's alleged that Ms. Stauch turned into this persona named Maria Sanchez, talking in a Spanish accent, did you review the video of the assault coming back from South Carolina?
I did not.
Would you like to see that?
Sure.
See, these guys are ready for it. I gotta find the exhibit number. $338. Let's try People's Exhibit 338. I didn't rehearse with them either. For the record, we're playing 338.
She keeps threatening me. Stop. Well, she keeps threatening.
Stop.
She keeps on threatening me. I have stopped it. She keeps on. Well, she got out of the restraints. She keeps on. Threatening me. I will.
arm down.
I will for you. She keeps
Put your
arm down.
Put your arm
But she
down.
keeps threatening me the whole time.
Tisha, give me your arm.
I will to you, but not
Tisha,
to her.
Tisha, give me your
I will
arm.
to you, but not to her.
Cooperate with me. Cooperate with me.
I
Do
will
it now.
with you, but not with her.
Cooperate with me.
I will with you, not with her.
Tisha?
I will with you. I said I would.
Then give me your arm now.
I said I would with you. I said I would with you. I said I would with you. Because
Stop
I'm
resisting.
not resisting. I said I would with her. Well, the other
They're
one.
double locking. Go ahead. I got her on.
I have the song.
Tisha, stop
I'm not resisting.
resisting. Yes, you are.
Hey, we stopped it at 1:56. You heard several voices on that.
Yes.
Did you ever hear a voice that was consistent with the voice that you saw in Dr. Lewis's interview of Ms. Stauch, where she was talking in a Spanish accent?
I did not.
Did you recognize Ms. Stauch's voice in this video clip?
I did.
And is it the same Ms. Stauch that you evaluated and the same person seated in this courtroom that you did your insanity evaluation?
Yes.
Is that consistent with or inconsistent with what she's telling you that she turned into Maria when she assaulted this deputy, the video we just watched?
It's not consistent with the Maria that I saw in Dr. Lewis's videos.
But is it consistent with what she's telling you, that she switched worlds or switched personalities and Maria went into protection mode and assaulted the deputy?
I would expect that if she had gone into this personality of Maria, that it would be presenting as the Maria that I saw in Dr. Lewis's videos, meaning with a Hispanic accent.
We're now going to go back to your interview and we're going to stay with People's Exhibit 724 and we're going to go to 2 hours and 21 seconds. And this is about a 10-minute clip. So if you want to sit down, but just to kind of give you a preview of what we're going to be talking about. Again, it has to deal with dissociative identity disorder, her switching personalities, and then actually talking about events close in time to the crime. Okay? It's up to you if you want to sit there or back here. Okay?
Did you say this was just 10 minutes?
This is about 10 minutes, right?
I can stay here.
Okay. We'll go ahead and play it.
What the timestamp?
2 hours and 21 seconds. We're going to hit play.
If I turn the volume on.
Yes, I do have a couple of questions. This kind of relates back to a few things. So you've mentioned flashbacks. Can you describe more what that feels like for you?
Yeah. So anytime that I feel like I'm threatened or something is in trouble, danger, threatened, any kind of way, I'll always have a flashback of like me trying to protect my mom. Like there was one time when my mom's boyfriend Greg was like beating my mom and he threw her through the glass window at the front and I ran around the house, got the bat, hit him in the legs and knocked him down. So like I'll have flashbacks of those times with those things happening. You know what I mean? I try to like, I did therapy before. We try to like reframe it, you know what I mean? I did that before through the school district. It just doesn't work for me. I would still have that flashback and then that's why sometimes I switch personalities and go into protective mode because I'll have that flashback and I'll think I'm back in that same time. You know what I mean? Like for example, you know, I text my boss and tell her that my stepdad died. I had a flashback that morning when Lena came into my room. I thought, I guess it was like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I texted my boss and told her that my stepdad had died. But that was because I was having flashbacks the whole time and nightmares of the day when my stepdad died because I weren't really sure if he was dead or not. You know what I mean? And it happens a lot because like I can see somebody walking on the street and I'll be like, that looks like him. One of the triggers is red and black. Okay, and I know you have red and black on. So I can even watch like NC State. That's one of them, basketball. You know, go to NC State game, red and black. You know what I mean? Because it's surrounded. It's not just one, it's surrounded. He would come in with red shirt on and black. And he always named this as like his whole thing of like his mom. So his mom was killed supposedly by his stepdad. So he always wears red and black to like commemorate, you know what I mean? So like I can see somebody walking on the road with red and black on it, and I'll have a flashback of stepdad coming in the room, turning his lights on, he'll go, my name is Jerry Lowry. And he has this whole like dialogue thing that he does before he heightens up to the huge, you know what I mean? And so that happens. That's why when I was driving one day on the back roads, I was thinking there was somebody walking and I was thinking it was him. And so like it gets scary because Like, what if one day I was to like try to run that person over, like thinking that was really him, you know what I mean? So those are the kind of flashbacks I have, and most of them, I'd say 90% of them have something to do with him. Me and Kyle call him Jackass James just because we like, you don't see it triggering me so much. Jackass James, because that's what, you know. Other that I have flashbacks is from prior because the house burned down when I was younger. And my mom blamed me, and I called 911, and I got in trouble for calling 911 because my mom was saying that the way they read the report, she wasn't going to be able to like get the house fixed on her insurance, and like same thing, got in trouble for calling 911. Said that here. What happened was I was trying to cook for my siblings, and I had a pod, and curtains used to not be they are now available, whatever. And I had to run go get my little brother, and I was trying to find my sister. And when I came back in, it caught flame on the thing, and it burnt my mom's whole kitchen living room. So like anytime there's something hot, I can smell it. Like I can smell the fire if I'm there. Like sometimes, like if, for example, it can be something small, like people could be doing like a wood fire in the woods, like, you know, burning trash or like a bonfire. I don't do bonfire because I will be at the bonfire and I'll just be like, no, like I now have a flashback of the time that the fire happened in the house. The reason we moved from North Carolina to South Carolina was to show and shop our house and set it on fire because we lived in a very neighborhood. So I'll have flashbacks of my mom calling me, telling me that everything we had worked for was burned in the house. So those are like just some examples of what happens. I mean, I can almost like feel like it's burning, or I can almost feel like I'm there. I smell it, I see it, you know what I mean? And then I'll remember everything, and it's almost like it's different than when I switch personalities. When I switch personalities, like I go to those whole different. When that happens and I have a flashback in that same place that it happened, like I just visually there. And it happened so much when my stepdad, like I could never, I tried the psychotherapy and the whole reframing it. I don't expect me to reframe getting molested by a person that your mom married and trusted you. How do you want me to reframe it? That's what I'd always tell him, like, that he didn't do it because he did, that just doesn't work. And so like, I tried doing all that, but I couldn't. Anyone that looked like him, anyone that freaking like walked like him, like anything, throughout my whole entire life. No, you know, and especially with the whole like, whenever he come in with the whole like James Byron, if their person's name was James, I'd always cringe and like, you know what I mean? When I read, this sounds bad, God forgive me. When I read the scripture in the book of James, I can't even go to the scripture in the book of James without having those flashbacks. And that's bad. Reading my Bible. Can't even read that section because that's his name. Because I'd be thinking like, as good as James was, because James was Jesus' brother, how is this named James? Like, there's something wrong here. And my brother, she gave my brother Dakota James, his real names, and like, I don't that. So those are like times that things just like were reading a flashback. And like when they did my brother's graduation, they walked across the stage and they were like, he graduated high school and I was there. And they were like, Dakota James Lowry. I literally was like, freaking out. Like, don't tell him that. He is not like his dad. You know, just some examples of a lot.
So you're saying that these flashbacks are more than just a memory.
Oh God, yeah. I'm telling you, almost like you're right there. See, so it's all your senses are activated. You know what I mean?
I also recognize that red and black is trigger for you. That you're familiar with flashbacks today when you told me.
So when you first said something to me, I didn't say anything to you, but that was the reason I didn't. Do you remember when you first were like, how are you doing? And I didn't say anything to you? I told myself, like, you know what I mean? Like, she has nothing to do with Jackass James. You know what I mean? So I'm sorry, don't think I tried to disrespect you in any way when you first said them to me, but I go into like that defense mode on it. My friend, when she comes to visit me on the video stream, she won't wear it. Like, she won't do it because she knows that's one of me. That's what I was responsible for. like, and I, you know, I went to school, like, I'd go watch ball games at North Carolina, but if we played NC State, I'd be like, oh, hell no. Because I'd just like surrounded by a sea of red and black, not.
And you've mentioned triggers. We've talked about several different triggers that you have. What exactly is a big trigger?
Well, if they don't trigger a flashback, which is usually what happens. It kind of depends on what my mental state already is. So basically, if it's just, I'm a little heightened, it'll be a flashback. If I am in severe protective mode, like scared for my life or someone else's life, it will go into anyone's enemy and I'm protecting those people around me. One time we were at Burger King, this was in January of 2020, and this guy, he came in and he was trying to pick on Lena about the drink machine. It's literally like, I felt like she was this guy was trying to do something to her. He looked like James in a way, sort of, kind of like body shape, everything. I get on the table at Burger King and I'm like turning out the whole entire Burger King like to protect her. Like, I feel like that's my job. But like, I have to do it first before Maria does. If Maria does it, I'm not gonna remember it. And if she does it, it's gonna be bad because then it's gonna be somebody who is trying to hurt somebody else who's gonna be hurt, you know.
I want to start with the last thing she said there. She said, I want to do something to protect people before Maria does, because if she does it, Maria is going to perhaps take it to a different level. Do you recall her saying that?
Yes.
And then she went on to said, I can't remember what Maria does. Do you remember that?
Yes.
How significant was that to your evaluation when you're considering dissociative identity disorder?
It was important to us during our evaluation, and I suspect we'll talk in more detail about it, but we had her delineate the events leading up to this offense. And she does, I use the word speculate, because she has told us that she doesn't know what Maria is thinking at any point in time. But she, at the same time, tells us that at the time of the offense, Maria might have thought that the individual who was killed, ultimately Gannon, was Letecia's stepfather.
Did she ever tell you at any point during the entirety of these interviews how she was able to tell you what Maria did if she doesn't remember what Maria does?
No, she was never able to explain that to us.
She talked about flashbacks at several times during this portion of the video. What's the significance of the flashbacks and why were you asking follow-up questions about that?
Flashbacks, again, were relevant to the question of mental state at the time of the offense. As I noted, she said that Maria, well, we were asking follow-up. I'm going to answer the second part first. We were asking follow-up questions because her description of these potential mental health symptoms at the time of the alleged offense were somewhat layered on top of each other and, quite frankly, a bit confusing to follow. So, you know, throughout the course of our evaluation, she would talk about dissociating and she would talk about these missions as though she were in a manic episode. She would also talk about dissociating and then the issue of flashbacks, which in itself is a form of dissociation, but not a dissociation as it pertains to a different personality state. So we were looking for symptoms potentially associated with this post-traumatic stress disorder, and flashbacks are a presentation associated with that. But given that her own self-report was confusing, difficult to follow, not really consistent with any of the specific presentations that we would expect for dissociative identity disorder or psychosis or even flashbacks associated with PTSD. We were asking follow-ups.
Was it inconsistent with how she described the flashbacks? Initially, she says, when I have a flashback, I switch personalities. Do you remember that?
She has said that, yes.
Did she later on come back and say, flashbacks are different than me switching personalities?
Yes.
What significance does that have, if any?
Again, it's trying to understand what is this clinical diagnosis that we're looking at. When it comes to flashbacks, flashbacks are when you feel as though you are specifically reliving a traumatic event from your past. It's more than just seeing something and being reminded of something that happened to you in the past, which we all probably experience from time to time. There's nothing particularly pathological about the latter one. But when it comes to flashbacks, usually an individual exhibits behaviors that are notable by other individuals because all of a sudden it's as though the person is no longer here in this awareness and reality because they are essentially reliving something that has happened to them in the past. So it's noticeable.
Did you see any evidence of her flashing back to anything while you were interviewing her during this period?
No.
It seems like that you were asking questions, and I guess I can ask, what were you trying to figure out what the triggering event was that would cause her to switch personalities during this conversation?
During this conversation, I think I was just trying to get a better understanding of what is it that she means when she says flashbacks. It's not uncommon to see in these types of evaluations people using psychological jargon without really using it correctly or understanding exactly what it means, which is, again, why we ask open-ended questions. So I was asking what she meant by flashbacks, because as I noted before, throughout the evaluation, she seemed to layer or conflate or use terminology, but seemed to mean something else. So I was just trying to get a better picture or understanding of what it was that she was trying to communicate.
And is this the first time you're hearing anything about red and black being some kind of triggering event for her?
That clip might have been the first time that she specifically stated that. I'd have to go back and watch all of the interviews to be sure about that.
Okay. But you recall her talking about that, and were you the one wearing red and black, or was Dr. Gray wearing red?
No, I was wearing a red and black coat that day.
Did you notice anything unusual when you first met her wearing your red and black outfit?
I remember when she came in, because that was the first interview for the sanity evaluations. She seemed a bit sullen, a bit, she wasn't as polite or bright as she was when we did the competency evaluations.
Speaking of that, did you and Dr. Gray perform some psychological testing during the course of these interviews?
Yes.
Did you have her remember phrases or words or numbers and sequences of numbers?
We did, yes.
I'm asking way too many questions in one time. How did she do on that? Let's talk about the number sequences first.
Sure. During the competency evaluation specifically, we gave a very brief cognitive screener. It's called, well, in short, it's called the MOCA. It's the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Test. It literally takes maybe 5 to 10 minutes to administer. And it looks at a variety of different cognitive domains. So things like attention, short-term memory. And when I say short-term memory, I'm speaking about being able to remember words over the course of a few minutes. It also looks at abstraction abilities, naming abilities, a little bit that looks at executive functioning, which is kind of an umbrella term that encompasses cognitive abilities associated with reasoning and problem solving and planning. But she did fine. She did fine on all of that. There wasn't anything noticeable that would call our attention to her having cognitive deficits or a cognitive disorder.
What about brain damage? Anything to indicate that she may have had brain damage?
Nothing specifically.
Did you administer what's called the Montreal Cognitive Assessment?
Yes, that's what I was just talking about.
Okay. Just happen to have that in my hand here.
Me?
I hand you what's been marked as 7-6. People first, 736. Recognize that piece of paper?
I do.
And what is that?
This was the brief cognitive screener that I was just talking about that we administered with Ms. Stauch during the course of her competency evaluation.
And with regards to People's Exhibit 736, is that a fair and accurate copy of the test and her results of that test, or at least her documentation of that test as you did it back during your evaluation?
Yes.
At this time, I'd move to admit People's Exhibit 736.
No objection.
Exhibit 736 will be admitted. Go ahead.
In People's Exhibit 736, on the right-hand top corner, there's a picture of a clock.
Yes.
Could you describe that particular clock and what Ms. Stauch did as a result of that examination?
Yes. That particular task, we call it clock drawing. Essentially, it's when we ask an individual from scratch to draw a clock, to put in all the numbers 1 to 12, and then to set the time to 10 past 11. We usually try to make sure that there is no clock in the room that they can copy. This particular, I'm not a neuropsychologist, so I'd say neuropsychology is not my specific specialty, but I do understand that this particular test is sensitive to some sort of brain impairment when that is present. So Ms. Stauch's clock drawing it's fine, for lack of a better term. She has a circle, she has all of the numbers, and the hands are appropriately set to 10 past 11.
And are you familiar with whether or not Dr. Lewis performed a similar test with Ms. Stauch in November of 2022?
Yes,
Did you see the results of that particular test?
I did.
Were they consistent with what you saw during your evaluation?
They are not.
Why?
I don't remember exactly what those other clocks looked like. Vaguely, I do remember that one was a clock, but all of the numbers were stacked on possibly the right-hand side, could have been the left-hand side. And I think there was a second clock drawing that looked significantly impaired, but I don't remember the specifics of it.
You have an opportunity to review Dr. Lewis's report in relation to her opinion, Mrs. Stauch's saying.
Yes.
And was that a big part of her opinion, indicating that Ms. Stauch may have some kind of brain damage as a result of the clock that she drew November of 2022?
Yes.
At this time, I'd like to go old school and publish this exhibit by just holding it up in front of the jury.
That's fine. Or you can just pass it to them and.
Okay, so we can do that. That's definitely old school. I will pass it to the jury. We'll have them take a look at it. We'll pass it through.
I'm old, so it's just school.
Clock.
Yeah.
Yes.
And while they're doing that, can we approach just to?
Yeah.
No. For the record, the jury, everyone had a chance to look at that. Okay, Dr. Torres, the next segment we're going to play is again, People's Exhibit 724. It's going to start at 2 hours and 16 minutes and 57 seconds. In this particular clip, we're going to be hearing more about Maria and who she protects. And then I'm going to ask some follow-up questions with regards to dissociative identity disorder and your evaluation in regards to that disorder, okay? So with that, we'll play the next clip.
With your dissociations, you said before, apart from Maria, there's a level of conscious awareness about it. Would you say it's like daydreaming in terms of other lives, other personalities?
Yeah, it is actually a whole world. The daydreaming to me would be just somebody having like a good imagination. You know what I mean? No, it's like a whole entirely different world. Like, for example, if you were to talk to Harmony, Harmony can tell you exactly what it was like to be abused in depth, like detail by detail. Every sexual part that questions she'd want to answer, she could do for you. You see what I'm saying? So I try not to say that's like daydreaming because that's like real. You know what I mean? Where if, you know, I think the other way is to like explain it. Maria, like I said, she doesn't have awareness that everybody else is just her world and she's protecting me. And there's not people consistent in her world. Like, for example, Maria wouldn't know you. The only people consistent in Maria's world is Chance, Harley, and like people that she's been sought out to protect. So it's not really daydreaming, it's an actual job that she has to do. The kids were part of that world. Like, anybody want to do something to Gannon, Lane, Harley, Maria feels like she can get them too, because I've spent my whole life not having adult protection. I'm gonna give them protection in 5 different forms. And that's because it's more of like different worlds that are created, not necessarily just, you know, like when I do it in a courtroom, I go to that whole world, not like the people can go with me, not me just making it up like, oh, I'm at the beach. Not like that. It's actually me going there to the beach with them.
I feel really silly about bringing up the beach. Let me ask you some questions about what we just saw. Again, she talks about Maria and she talks about who she protects and who she's in the world. Now she's expanding who Maria protects. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And she includes Lena, Gannon, Harley, and I believe she said Chance, if I recall correctly. Do you recall
Yes.
that?
Yes.
What significance is that, knowing that we're going to see eventually her interview where she seems to indicate that she turned into Maria when Gannon was killed? What's your take on that?
I would think, or at least, my understanding of dissociative identity disorder, these different personality states have their own details associated with them. To me, in terms of Ms. Stauch's self-report, her presentation, it has always been confusing to me how all of the personalities seem to have an awareness of Ms. Stauch's own history. I'm not necessarily an expert in dissociative identity disorder. There are some people who devote a large chunk of their work to that practice. I am an expert in forensics. I'm an expert in clinical diagnosis. So I have some awareness of these diagnoses. But that being said, in terms of my understanding of the conceptualization of that disorder, there just seems to be too much of an overlap in terms of what Ms. Stauch says about these other personalities, the way in which she can control going from one to another, the ways in which they overlap with each other.
Did you or Dr. Gray ever consider the fact that she could just be making this all up?
Yes.
That she could just be winging it as she's talking to you, and she must have slipped about talking about protecting Gannon in this segment?
I don't know that we ever thought of it specifically like that. I mean, we did consider the possibility of feigning or exaggerating, simply given the fact that she exaggerates. She seems to exaggerate in her self-report to us throughout these interviews, the psychological testing, the fact that her self-report during the sanity evaluations is at times consistent and at times significantly inconsistent with her self-report at the time of the competency evaluations, as well as the collateral data that we had available to us. She tells us that these personality states have been present since her adolescence, and she specifically mentions that Maria shows up. I don't know exactly when, but she mentioned to us that Maria was around when she was 16. You would just think that somebody would have seen something, maybe not a mental health professional, given that her mental health treatment was somewhat spotty. But even the individuals that we spoke to, nobody had heard of this or knew anything about it.
Talk to Al. Did you talk to Al Stauch about these things?
We asked him, I don't remember the specific question, but we did. We asked him if he knew of her behaving erratically, going into different personality states. We asked him specifically if he was aware of somebody called Maria Sanchez. And overall, no, he didn't endorse seeing or knowing anything about this.
And would Harley Hunt, her daughter, probably be the best person to know about those things because she's been with her whole life?
We had hoped to ask Harley that question, but as I said, we weren't able to speak to her ultimately, so we didn't get that opportunity.
Why did you ask Ms. Stauch whether or not she was daydreaming, or words to that effect? Do you recall that question?
Yes. Again, given her tendency or the way that she was presenting to exaggerate, I wanted to see what she said in response to that question, because of her self-report of creating these identities, creating these worlds. To me, it sounds more like a fantasy. It sounds more like daydreaming than actually what would be expected with dissociative identity disorder in terms of not having that sort of control. So I wanted to see what she said if I asked her, are these daydreams, or how is it different from a daydream?
during the entirety of both your competency evaluation and the insanity evaluation, did she ever tell you that she couldn't recall what Maria did, or that there was a blackout and I have no recollection of what happened?
She said it largely to two major events, one of them being this alleged offense. The other one was when Maria emerged at age 16. Ms. Stauch was telling us about some arrest or some problem she had gotten involved in. I forget exactly what state this occurred in, if she was in North Carolina or South Carolina at the time. But it had something to do with a bottle shattering. And then, if I'm recalling correctly, I think she said that she may have assaulted someone else, but she said that it was Maria who did it in protective mode and that Ms. Stauch has no memory of it.
Okay. Kind of want to finish up today's testimony of going back to your hypothetical on insanity. Remember that?
Yes.
The family member felt that he was going to power to change the world, and they wanted to kill that family member because he wanted to prevent that person from doing that.
Sure. Yes. Close enough.
In that hypothetical situation, would you expect the person who's charged with a crime, if they are truly legally insane, to make up stories about how the crime happened?
No, I would expect more consistency from one report to another. Often when people are arrested, they're interviewed by police. I mean, sometimes they refuse to be interviewed. But whenever they are, it's helpful to read what they say to police because it's so close to the time of the offense. If there's a video of it or an audio recording, even better, because I can see it with my own eyes or hear it with my own ears. But usually when an individual does ultimately meet the insanity defense, there's more consistency. There's documentation about a history. There's information enough to substantiate the claims in the self-report and what was occurring with that person at the time of the offense.
And is that in large part because they didn't have the capacity to know that it was wrong, therefore they don't have the capacity not to admit to it? That makes sense?
Say that. I think there's some double negatives in there. I'm trying to follow.
Let's go to your hypothetical.
Okay.
Charged person or the person claiming to be insane says, I killed my family member because if I didn't, they would have changed the world. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
Would there be a reason for that individual to lie about the reason why he did that if it was wrong?
Usually, again, in the evaluations that I've done, the issue of lying or changing the story doesn't often come up. Usually the story or the presentation is pretty consistent across time periods. Sometimes there might be a couple of details that are off. They're usually not large conceptual details, but I would attribute that just to issues of normal memory, forgetting across time, because sometimes we see these people for evaluations years after the offense has actually occurred.
And Dr. Torres, the next segment we're going to play is about an hour and 14 minutes long. We're going to wait and do that tomorrow. Friday, that's right. We're not here tomorrow, so Friday. But this is going to be, the next clip is where she describes the events leading to the death of Gannon and the events surrounding that, at least the first version events that she gives you. Okay, are you familiar with that part?
Yes.
I may remind you again on Friday, but that's where we'll start out Friday morning. So now's a good time to stop, Judge.
Dr. Torres, you can go ahead and step down for now.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will have our evening break. Again, do not discuss the case among yourselves. Do not discuss the case with anyone else. Do not do your own independent research about any aspect of this case. Remember, you can still blog or communicate with others, just not about this case. You can't do any blogging about your jury experience or communication with other jurors. You can still watch TV and go on the internet. If anything regarding this case comes through your feed, change the channel or turn the page and do not give it any attention. Do not use any information from any other source concerning the facts or the law applicable to this case other than the evidence presented and the instructions that I give to you. We should be able to start right on time at 9 o'clock on Friday morning, so be where you need to be. As I said earlier, feel free to bring in jackets, blankets, those sorts of things, and we'll see what we can do about Friday. So with that, all right, for the jury, please. Yes, you too. Thank you. You may all be seated. Record should reflect the jury has left the courtroom. Mr. Tillini, is the defendant prepared for courtesy advisement? Sure. Okay. All right. Prosecution, what felony convictions would you rely upon to impeach the defendant's credibility if she were to testify?
I don't believe there are any, Judge.
All right. Ms. Stauch, how old are you, ma'am? All right. And how much education have you had? Okay. I've heard through the trial that you have a bachelor's, a master's, a master's, and a doctorate degree. Is that accurate? Okay. I'll turn that one on. I will. Just for this one, yeah. That is, it's either 3 or 4. All right. And how's your health today, ma'am? Are you now or have you been under the influence of any alcohol or drugs in the past 24 hours? Do you understand that you have a right not to testify? And that if you choose not to testify, then the jury can be instructed about that right and be told that the jury cannot infer your guilt from the fact that you remain silent, and it would still be the prosecution's burden to prove the elements of the case to the jury beyond a reasonable doubt. Do you understand, however, that you have a right to testify? Do you understand that if you want to testify, no one can prevent you from doing so? Do you also, do you further understand that if you choose to testify, you may be cross-examined by the prosecution concerning any matters which are relevant and material to this case? Do you also understand that juror questions may be submitted, but the same rules of law, evidence, and procedure that apply to juror question or that apply to lawyer questions will also apply to juror questions, and that improper juror questions will not be permitted. However, legally proper juror questions may be asked of you if you decide to testify. Essentially, you've seen that process of questions that have been submitted by jurors to other witnesses. You would be subject to that same process. Do you understand that? Do you understand that the decision to testify or not to testify is yours personally, and only you can make this decision? Do you further understand, even though your attorney may disagree with your decision, that the decision is entirely yours and yours alone?
Yes.
Do you fully understand this advisement?
Yes, sir.
Is there anything further you wish for me to explain to you concerning your right to testify or not testify?
No, sir.
All right. I've given you this advisement because it's required under the law before you make a decision regarding whether you choose to testify or not. I'm not going to ask you about that now. You're entitled to see all of the evidence that's been brought against you by the prosecution. So we need to finish with their case first, but I also understand that we may be getting towards the end of that either by the end of this week or maybe be the beginning of next week. So I want to give you some time to think about it. I want to give you some time to talk to your attorneys about it. There's a lot of evidence in this case. There are a lot of things that you may need to consider before you make that decision. At some point, however, I will ask you the ultimate question. What is your decision? You don't need to tell me now, but I want you to think about that because at some point I'm going to ask you that question. Okay?
Okay.
All right. I muted. did those again. Okay. You tested them, right? Just tap, yeah, okay. All right, just wanted to make sure. No, I turned them off, so they should be okay. All right, is there anything that we need to address outside the presence of the jury at this point in time, prosecution?
Just logistically, Your Honor, can we leave stuff here? Do you have stuff happening tomorrow?
Who is that? You can leave it here.
Okay.
Just clean a space off at the end of the corner of the table. So they've got some place to sit and some place to put something. But I don't think that really is going to take very long. It's more going to be, I think, in the form of argument than it's going to be a whole lot of presentation of anything else.
Okay.
And then what, the 10 o'clock is WebEx. So the other one is WebEx. And then the last one will be, where am I doing that? Mediation. Yeah, and I'll be here the whole time. So yeah, no, you can leave it all here.
Okay.
The only issue I want to disclose to you, the only issue is tomorrow afternoon, I'm doing a mediation for somebody on something.
Okay.
And it's a criminal case. So, but you know how those work, and I'll be here is he in custody? So he's not in custody, but I'll be here. There will be an attorney with him and stuff. So I think everything will be okay.
Okay.
So,
Thank
okay.
you.
All right. All right, then we'll see everybody on Friday morning. Do you anticipate that you're going to be done on Friday?
Well, it will totally depend on length of probably direct and cross, mostly of Dr. Torres. We've
Right.
got one witness after that. I gave the exhibits that we're going to use through that witness to Mr. Tellini. I think it was yesterday I gave you those.
Okay,
It'll depend on just
That's
how
fine.
that goes. I would anticipate latest, probably Monday sometime.
okay. And so if necessary, are we taking Dr. Lewis out of order?
She's flying in Saturday night, but she's not flying out till Wednesday.
Oh, we ought to be good then.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, all right. All right, if we have some downtime on Friday, it's not going to be that big a deal. We will talk about jury instructions and see where we are going and go from there. Okay, court will be in recess. Thank you.